Chapter 920. Swordsmen stood around the demonic ship, 2 in black and 2 in white. All of them had cold expressions and stood as straight as swords. The killing intent on their bodies was extremely strong. At that moment, Sumo even felt that these 4 cultivators did not cultivate all the way to the peak of the supremacy realm, but killed all the way to the peak of the supremacy realm. The 4 cultivators each held their swords and seemed to have finished their moves. However, it was definitely a stance that combined offense and defense. Moreover, the 4 cultivators stood according to the 4 symbols, which was clearly a type of formation. At this moment, Wu Er ate the pill and her expression became slightly better. However, it was probably impossible for her to resist another peak of the supremacy realm. Between experts, a single thought could determine life and death. "Who are you people?" Sumo asked in a deep voice. "Swordsman 12. Swordsman 11. Swordsman 7. Swordsman 5. The 4 swordsmen spoke one after another. Their tones were almost the same. The 2 swordsmen in white were swordsmen 12 and 11, while the 2 swordsmen in black were swordsmen 7 and 5. "Demon King, we have been waiting for you here for many days under the orders of our master," Swordsman 5 said. "Hee." Sumo sneered. "Previously, I killed a swordsman 13 in the wisdom realm. You guys are the same. Who is your master?" "No comment," Swordsman 5 said. "However, you will definitely not be able to leave today. You killed our people, and today, this interstellar barrier will be your burial ground." "Is that so?" Sumo's eyes narrowed slightly, his white clothes fluttered slightly, and his eyes began to gradually turn black. "Kill me? I'm afraid you guys can't." At this moment, for Lianbua swords floated around Sumo. They all emitted a dazzling brilliance. The 4 swordsmen couldn't help but frown slightly. There were a total of 13 swordsmen under the black blind swordsman, and they were divided into 2 categories, black and white. The swordsmen in black all held Lianbua immortal swords, while the swordsmen in white held supremacy immortal swords. These swordsmen had gone through layers of selection and many experiences. Every single one of them could rule over a realm and take charge of an area on their own. Each of them had the combat strength to kill those above their level. Moreover, the higher their ranking was, the higher their battle prowess was. Swordsman 13 was the weakest among them. As far as they could remember, the 4 of them had never joined forces to kill a cultivator of the same level. Previously, they had estimated Sumo's battle prowess. They didn't expect to kill Sumo with the 4 swords just now. However, they did not expect that Sumo was not injured at all. However, the Plum Blossom sprite didn't have much battle power left. "Demon King, this is a treasure trove. Don't talk big," Swordsman Diwu said coldly. Then he moved. They were assassins, and they had said enough today. They prefer to speak with their swords. Chi. The 4 swordsmen moved almost at the same time. Their movements seemed to be as one, and they were extremely well coordinated. Moreover, the positions between them had changed in an instant. It was a special kind of teleportation that was unbelievably fast. The 4 cultivators were split into 2 groups. The 5th swordsman and the 7th swordsman charged toward Sumo, and the 11th swordsman and the 12th swordsman went straight for Wu Er. Sumo couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. At the same time, she also understood that the opponents were absolute assassins, because they were people who would do anything to achieve their goals. At this moment, Wu Er no longer had the strength to fight, not to mention the swordsman in black. She might not even be able to block the sword of the swordsman in white. The target of the swordsman in black and white was actually Sumo, but they attacked Wu Er. It was obvious that they wanted to make it difficult for Sumo to protect herself. As long as Sumo died, they didn't care what methods they used. Assassins had no morality. Of course, in a life and death situation, the winner would be the morality. Of course, Sumo understood this point. 2 black swords went straight for Sumo. This time, their swords were not inferior to the previous one, and they were still full of power. The black blind swordsmen had been practicing swords all their lives. They didn't know how to use other magic weapons, and they disdained to use other magic weapons. The The sword was the most noble weapon in their hearts. They had a sword in their hands and a sword in their hearts. They were more like a sword. The so-called unity of man and sword could be said to be at the most basic level for these four swordsmen. Because once again, they understood that man was man, sword was sword, but man was not man, and sword was not sword. Only a true swordsman would understand this feeling. The two black swords were like two whistling black dragons. The dragon's tail was in the hands of the two swordsmen, and the dragon's head was straight for Sumo. Sumo's lianbua was in the void. But the swordsmen were not afraid, and they attacked directly. At this moment, the spiritual energy in the void was rolling, and many forces in the surroundings were being drawn. It was a strange resonance. Inside the interstellar barrier, many floating continents were buzzing and shaking. It was a power that could destroy heaven and earth. Fortunately, the interstellar barrier they were in was enough for them to use. Otherwise, their power was enough to destroy many small worlds. The power stirred by the two black swords was enough to shock the world. This sword was not as hidden as the previous one, but its momentum was 30% stronger. The two swordsmen, one in front, one behind. This was different from their previous position. They were attacking Sumo from the front and back. Sumo's expression was cold, his eyes flashing with black light. He had already mobilized all of his power. In his Dan sea, spiritual energy rose, as if it was burning. In this battle, he had to fight to the death to have a chance of survival. It could be said that this was Sumo's most dangerous battle since he had entered Izong, because the other side wanted Sumo to die without any room for maneuver. There was a reason why the other side had chosen to attack inside the interstellar barrier. This place did not belong to Chenluo, nor did it belong to Lioli. No matter how big a battle occurred here, it would usually not alarm the Lotus warriors of the two worlds. Sumo had no backup. This was indeed a good place to kill. But Sumo did not want to be killed, and he wanted to kill others. Sumo's eyes were pitch black. The demonic killing intent in his heart had been completely aroused. Crackle, boom, hum. With a thought, Sumo's lotus vine whipped the yin-yang bell. The yin-yang bell suddenly glowed with black and white light, and at the same time, the sound waves rose again. Boom, hum, hum. The loudest sound was deafening, but it was tangible. The yin-yang bell shook, sweeping up thousands of interstellar dust particles, which directly dispersed in all directions. In fact, it was the power of the two lianbua weapons combined. At that moment, an endless desert surged from the center, spreading outwards, rolling like smoke, churning like sand. It was an indiscriminate attack. The black swords of the 5th and 7th swordsmen bore the brunt and were directly swept into the sand. But the two swordsmen's expressions were cold, unmoved. At the same time, the swords of the 11th and 12th swordsmen were also deeply trapped. Their swords were aimed at Wu-Er. At this time, Wu-Er could only wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth, struggling to hold the Kuan butterfly spear. She did not want to be a burden to Sumo. Therefore, while Sumo was not paying attention, she swallowed another elixir. Wu-Er understood that as long as she could kill a swordsman, the pressure on Sumo would be greatly reduced. She knew that even Sumo could not control 4 lianbua weapons at the same time for a long time. Whoosh! When the elixir entered her mouth, Wu-Er's pale face instantly turned red. However, that kind of red was very unnatural. That was an immortal restoration elixir, which could instantly restore Wu-Er's peak combat power. But side effects were great. It would only aggravate Wu-Er's injury. But at this time, Wu-Er had no choice. She had to lend Su-Imo a hand. Boom! Wu-Er flew up, and the Kuan butterfly spear suddenly shot out. With the power of the yin-yang bell, she went straight to the 12th swordsman. As for the sword of the 11th swordsman, Wu-Er had turned a blind eye to it. Chapter 921. Wu-Er was risking her life to the point of mutual destruction. However, Sumo did not want her to do that. With a thought, the soul depository cauldron flew toward 11. This time, he used the cauldron as an offensive treasure. The soul depository cauldron pressed down and blocked 11's sword light. In fact, part of his sword light had already been melted by the yin-yang bell sound waves. Therefore, the sword light that was flying towards Wu Er under the soul depository cauldron suddenly dissipated. However, Wu Er's Kuan butterfly spear had already collided with 12 sword. Boom! Crack! The Kuan butterfly spear was a Lianbua, so it naturally had the upper hand. However, Wu Er had just used the immortal restoration pill to forcibly mobilize her power. Therefore, the Kuan butterfly spear shook violently, and 12 sword light collapsed. Not only did the sword light collapse, but a crack appeared on the Venerable One's immortal sword. Crack! With a crisp sound, the spiritual energy inside the immortal sword began to dissipate. In this confrontation, Wu Er had the upper hand in terms of divine weapons. However, 12 did not withdraw his sword. Not only did he not withdraw his sword, but he also moved forward. This move could be described as ruthless. As an assassin, he could already tell that Wu Er was an arrow at the end of its flight. Even though his immortal sword was damaged, as long as he could bite Wu Er, she would die for sure. Therefore, his sword did not retreat. Instead, it advanced. He wanted to force Wu Er to attack again, but Wu was indeed powerless at this point. The Kuan butterfly spear deflected the sword light, but the second sword light arrived. Moreover, Swordsman 12's body suddenly lit up with a faint brilliance. It was a defensive technique. The radiance did not dissipate despite the yin-yang bell's sound waves. In fact, it did not need to dissipate. As long as the defensive technique could last for a few breaths' time, it would be enough to solve everything. His robe was as white as snow, and his sword light was like lightning. 12 exerted his swords to the extreme, because he was creating opportunities for the other swordsmen. Even though there were 4 swordsmen, they were a complete unit at the moment. If he could win here, he could affect the overall situation. The sword came again, and golden blood seeped out of the corner of Wu Er's mouth. It was impossible for a 7th-stage Venerable Realm cultivator to fight against a peak-stage Venerable Realm cultivator, not to mention that Wu Er was injured. If Wu Er were to receive this sword strike again, it would definitely bode ill for her, and she might even die directly. Therefore, Sumo had already used her Kuan Soul Blade. Actually, the 2 black swords that pierced towards Sumo did not completely disperse. However, Sumo couldn't care less. He couldn't let anything happen to Wu Er. Hua. He raised the Kuan Soul Blade and slashed at the Swordsman 12. Sumo's attack was also filled with anger, because Swordsman 12 wanted to kill Wu Er. This was something that Sumo absolutely could not tolerate. At this moment, the lotus vines behind him had already coiled up. However, Sumo was not sure if it could block the 2 black sword lights. So, Sumo was taking a gamble. He bet that the lotus vine would be able to block the 2 sword lights, and that he would be able to cut down the Swordsman 12 with 1 slash. In fact, Sumo only needed an instant. Whoosh, boom! The Kuan Soul Blade's light suddenly soared. The blade instantly turned into 5 colors, directly blocking in front of Wu Er, and at the same time, slashed at Swordsman 12. But Swordsman 12's eyebrows suddenly twitched. He knew that he absolutely could not block this sword. How could he not know that Swordsman 13 died under the Kuan Soul Blade? However, at the moment when Sumo slashed, Swordsman 12's eyes flashed with a touch of ruthlessness. The Kuan Soul Blade rose up with endless colorful lights. The immortal sword in Swordsman 12's hand suddenly rose up. He did not dodge, but went straight to the Kuan butterfly blade. Sumo was also slightly stunned, because the venerable immortal sword absolutely could not block his Kuan Soul Blade. Moreover, the immortal sword just now was already damaged. Not good. Sumo suddenly thought of a possibility. Immediately, he thought of using the yin-yang bell to cover himself and Wu Er. However, he was still 1 step too late. Looking again, Swordsman 12 suddenly spat out a golden soul blood from his mouth. The soul blood, like a magnet, fell directly on his venerable immortal sword. Boom! Self-destructing a divine weapon. This was a move that ordinary cultivators would not easily use. At the Venerable Realm, there were even fewer who would self-destruct their divine weapons, because every divine weapon was not easy to obtain. Venerable cultivators' magic treasures were all peerless treasures. And for existences like the black and white swordsmen, the swords in their hands were even more important than their lives. Self-destructing a divine weapon was equivalent to cutting off one's own arms and legs. From this, it could be seen that the black and white swordsmen were determined to succeed or die trying. Boom! The power of a venerable divine weapon's self-destruction was comparable to Lianhua. Now, Swordsman 12's sword could stand up to Sumo's Kuin soul blade. All of a sudden, a mushroom-like cloud rose in the starry sky. At the last moment, Swordsman 12 abandoned his sword and retreated. He still wanted to give himself a chance to live. However, it was all too late, because two great forces directly swept him in. The white light on his body had already collapsed. Boom! Boom! The Kuin soul blade's might and the divine weapon's self-destruction. The two great forces directly strangled the cultivator in white to death. Alas, such a peak venerable realm cultivator had fallen just like that. Tens of millions of years of cultivation had disappeared in an instant. However, his death was not meaningless, because the storm of power had already made the demonic arc unstable. The entire demonic arc was a continent that could capsize at any time. It buzzed and shook incessantly. At the same time, Sumo and Wu were swept up by the great forces. Although they were not swept into the center of the storm, they still endured the incomparably great tide of power. Wah wah! The demonic arc shook, and Wu could not stand steadily. She used the Kuin butterfly spear to support her body. However, her core, was surging, and she could not control it all. Two mouthfuls of golden blood gushed out and fell on the demonic arc. Wu-er! Sumo knew that Wu-er could not fight anymore. There were still many demonic flowers around her that automatically protected her, but those flowers of blood almost instantly turned into powder. The power of everything was too violent. Xiaolang, don't care about me. Wu-er knew that they were in great danger at this time. Whoosh! How could Sumo not care about her? With a thought, Sumo's Chinquin pouch flew out. However, this time, he did not use it to restrain the opponent's magic weapons, but directly put Wu-er in the Chinquin pouch. At this time, if he was a moment late, Wu-er would very likely perish. Even a peak venerable was killed, let alone Wu-er. However, after all, Sumo was unable to attend to one thing and lose sight of the other. He withstood the spiritual storm that attacked him and also saved Wu-er. However, his back had been left to the two black-clothed swordsmen. The fifth swordsman and the seventh swordsman were more powerful than the fifth swordsman. In the sound waves of the yin-yang bell, their bodies also glowed with a black brilliance. The brilliance was the same as the 12 swordsmen's brilliance just now. They could temporarily not fear the sound waves of the yin-yang bell. With the Lianhua immortal sword in their hands, they directly came over the waves. They were not riding on swords, but with long swords in their hands, they wanted to kill Sumo. How could they miss this opportunity that the 12 swordsmen exchanged with their lives? They suddenly arrived. Their swords flashed in the void, strangely penetrated the lotus vines, and stabbed straight at Sumo. Chapter 922. Above the lotus vines, a green light shone like a curtain. In fact, from the outside, it looked almost impenetrable. The light of the lotus vines formed a wall of light behind Sumo, and inside the wall of light were endless blood-colored red flowers. There were 2 layers of protection. However, the movement techniques of the 2 black-clothed swordsmen were extremely strange. They wielded black swords like ghosts. Their bodies glowed with black light, and then they directly passed through the yin and yang sound waves. In the void, there was a flash of light. At that moment, they seemed to be performing a strange spatial jump. At this moment, if there was a hidden lotus warrior watching the battle, he would be extremely shocked, because the 2 black-clothed swordsmen were using a top-level lotus technique, flowing light. The flowing light technique was extremely magical and could penetrate many defenses. However, this lotus technique was extremely difficult to cultivate. Even if you succeeded, unless you were a top-level lotus warrior, you could not use it continuously. Below the 3rd tier of lotus warrior, every time you used it, you had to wait for another 3 years before you could use it again. And in the venerable realm, it could only be used once every 10 years. Such a technique seemed to be of little value. Therefore, it was mostly lost. But for assassins, it was indeed a secret technique, because at critical times it often had a miraculous effect. Sumo did not know that there was such a lotus technique in the Yizong world. Moreover, the flowing light technique just happened to be able to break through the defenses of the lotus vines and the blood rose. The defenses of the lotus vines and the blood rose itself had loopholes. After all, they were not ultimate defensive treasures, but a last resort for Sumo. And this last resort had long been seen through by the two black-clothed swordsmen. One had to know that they were at the peak of the venerable realm, the same level as Sumo. Even in the entire Yizong world, they were existences second only to Lotus warriors. In the entire Yizong world, there were not many Lotus warriors. Therefore, these swordsmen were all top-level existences. They were not ordinary killing machines. They were the outstanding cultivators of the entire Yizong world. Therefore, they grasped the best opportunity to strike. Sumo killed Swordsman 12 in anger and did her best to save Wu'er. But Swordsman 12's self-destruction changed everything. Sumo did not have time to care about her back. This opportunity was fleeting. The two black swords were like black snakes that pierced through the defense and swam toward Sumo. At this moment, the sword light was less than 3 feet away from Sumo. For cultivators above the mortal realm, this distance was no longer a distance. Moreover, they were all venerable ones. At that moment, Sumo felt a chill run down her spine, and a strong feeling of being torn apart assaulted her. He knew that the lotus vine defense could not block the swords of the two black swordsmen. It was a moment of life and death. Sumo definitely did not have the ability to withstand those two swords. Those were two Lianbua divine weapons at the peak of the venerable realm. Any one of them could kill Sumo. At this moment, it was impossible for Sumo to turn around and save herself. However, he still tried his best to turn sideways. At the same time, a red light suddenly lit up on his back. A huge red shadow appeared behind Sumo, its wings spanning over 100 feet. It was none other than the Crimson Puppet. The Crimson Puppet was at the peak of the rebirth realm, but its physical body was extremely strong. Previously, after Sumo used it, she kept it in the shadow behind her back. Unexpectedly, it was put to use now. The red light soared into the sky. However, a Crimson Puppet could not completely block the swords of the two black swordsmen. Puff! The 7 swordsmen's sword hit the Crimson Puppet. It was like a sword piercing through rotten wood. There was almost no resistance. Even a venerable's physical body was like a clay statue in front of the Lianbua. However, the 7th swordsman's expression changed slightly when he saw the Crimson Puppet. Bloodwing clan. He let out a cry of surprise. He was just as shocked as the eldest princess that day. However, his sword had already pierced through the Crimson Puppet's heart. Although the Crimson Puppet was a living puppet and did not have an immortal heart, this sword was enough to render it useless. The Crimson Puppet's gray eyes instantly dimmed. It did delay the 7th swordsman's sword. Most importantly, the 7th swordsman seemed to hesitate for a moment when he saw the Bloodwing clan. Boom! However, half of the Crimson Puppet's body collapsed under Lianbua's sword. The Red Crimson Puppet only had half of its body left. However, he managed to fight for a chance of survival for Sumo. With the help of the Crimson Puppet, Sumo had already turned half of his body. He tilted his body and waved the Kuin Soul Saber. This was the limit of what Sumo could do. That saber directly met the sword of the 5th swordsman, because this was the sword that posed the greatest threat to Sumo. In fact, everything happened at the same time. There were so many forces and so many changes. It was almost inseparable. Everything happened too fast. Boom! Crack! Sumo's 2nd saber slashed out fiercely. The saber radiance was still there. This saber collided with the sword of the 5th swordsman. This time, the 5th swordsman did not stop. Now, the battle had reached its climax. They were not testing each other. They were fighting with their lives. The one who was more ruthless might have the upper hand. Moreover, Sumo was at a disadvantage now. He was struggling to cope with it. Boom! Rumble, the saber radiance and the sword radiance shot up at the same time. However, in the dust, the fifth swordsman suddenly turned into a black light. His figure disappeared completely. The man and the sword merged into one and rushed towards Sumo again. The black and white swordsmen certainly did not want to die. But today, they could only exchange their lives with death. The 12th swordsman had fallen. The 5th swordsman could also die as long as they could kill Sumo. Then, everything would be worth it. The pride of killers was to kill their targets. That was their mission and also a kind of destiny. In fact, from the day they became black blind swordsmen, they were told that they would die at any time. It was just a matter of time. Therefore, they killed and cultivated with all their might in order to kill more people and live longer. It was a terrible and sad cycle. No one could understand the world of the black and white swordsmen. When the 5th swordsman turned into a sword radiance, no one knew what he was thinking. But all the black and white swordsmen said the same thing. We have been waiting for the person who can kill us. An assassin must be a lonely existence. That was like the black blind swordsman. He walked alone in a hidden place. No one could understand his loneliness. And the black and white swordsmen all had his shadow. Sumo was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Because all of this happened too quickly. For killers at the peak of the venerable realm, holding the Lianbua, were fighting to the death. How could it be ordinary? Whoosh, Sumo struggled to swing his saber again. But the power of this move could not be compared to the previous one. At the same time, a forbidden map appeared in front of him. That was the last spell that Sumo could use. Boom! The saber radiance and the sword radiance collided again. The sword radiance of the 5th swordsman steadily gained the upper hand. The Kuan soul saber radiance dimmed instantly. However, Sumo's forbidden map entangled the sword radiance. But the distance between them was too close. Puff! Even though it was locked by the forbidden map, the 5th swordsman's sword still directly penetrated Sumo's body. Golden blood suddenly splashed and spread several feet. Sumo's face instantly turned pale, and the black light in his eyes suddenly dissipated. However, he gritted his teeth and raised his saber again. Puff crack! The Kuan soul saber rose. The moment the black sword penetrated his body, Sumo also cut the black sword in half. Chapter 923. One with the sword. Sumo had broken the black sword, which meant that he had killed the 5th swordsman. A wisp of soul spirit instantly escaped from the black sword. Under the Kuan soul blade, another soul was killed. However, at this time, Sumo's face was bloodless, and the front of his body was full of blood. That sword strike, just now, was just a hair's breadth away from stabbing his immortal heart. And if Lianbua had pierced his immortal heart, Sumo would have died immediately. At this time, Sumo was already seriously injured. On his body, there was a fist-sized golden bloody hole. Inside the bloody hole, black light lingered, and there was a sizzling sound. The bloody hole was still expanding. One should know that it was injured by Lianbua, and without special treatment, it would not heal at all. Sumo's blood was scattered on the demonic boat. Green smoke rose from the demonic boat. The immortal energy in Sumo's body began to scatter, and a lot of immortal energy had begun to escape from the bloody hole that would not heal. At that moment, Sumo was like a balloon with a hole. He was rapidly consuming it, and would die in a moment. It could be said that this was the most dangerous situation Sumo had faced since his reincarnation. At this time, several seals appeared on Sumo's bloody hole. They were changing and deducing with all their strength. However, the speed at which they deduced and changed could not keep up with the speed of immortal energy dissipating. They could not seal it. All of this happened in an instant, and the most important thing was that the battle was not over yet. The 12th swordsman and the 5th swordsman had died, but there was still the 11th swordsman and the 7th swordsman. Given Sumo's current state, any one of them could take Sumo's life. The 11th swordsman's sword was already thrusting again. 2 black and white swordsmen had fallen, and the 7th swordsman and the 11th swordsman knew that there was no turning back today. If they did not succeed, they would die. They were not stingy with their lives and must kill Sumo, unless they were all dead. That was an extremely terrifying belief. Whoosh! The 11th swordsman's sword was extremely fast. This time, he no longer tried to protect himself. He was also fighting with his life on the line. At this time, there were a few pieces of lianbois floating around Sumo. However, he no longer had the strength to activate them. Crackle! The lotus vines danced in the air. However, without the activation of its master, its power could not be fully unleashed. Swordsman 11's sword light directly broke through all the obstacles. Sumo had already lost the ability to defend herself. On the other side, the sword of the 7th swordsman made a comeback. With 2 sword lights coming one after the other, it could be said that Sumo would definitely die, because at this moment, Sumo had no power to resist. He had a lot of lianbois, but he was seriously injured. The bloody hole in his chest was still bleeding profusely, and his immortal chi was continuously dissipating. At that moment, Sumo felt as if the world was spinning and there were no roots under her feet. He could faint at any moment. However, he could still sense that there were 2 sharp sword chis in front and behind him. Every strand of sword chi was fatal. In the void, spiritual energy surged like a hurricane, and layers of battle clouds swept into the starry sky. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. From the moment Sumo was intercepted until now, only a dozen breaths had passed. In fact, Sumo still had a treasure. That was the 5-color god lotus that Li Shui gave him. That god lotus could instantly mobilize the power of the ancient lotus star field, allowing him to soar to the 5th level of the lotus realm. However, Sumo understood that Li Shui's 5-color god lotus was reserved for him to save AMU. He had just left the ancient lotus star field not long ago, and he had not even reached the glazed world yet, but he was already using that god lotus. It was simply a disgrace. Therefore, even if Sumo died, he would not use that god lotus. Today, if he died here, he would not be qualified to save AMU. After all, if he died in the hands of 4 peak venerables, he would not be qualified to challenge the hidden lotus soul. At this moment, Sumo did not have much chance. The 2 sword rays were like 2 spears that were about to penetrate Sumo's body. At that moment, Sumo covered his chest with one hand and held the Kuin soul saber with the other. He wanted to swing the saber again, but he had no strength left. His white robe was covered in golden bloodstains, which had already started to dry and gradually turned red. His long hair was flying in the air, and his face was pale. His eyes were dim, and there was only a trace of cold light left. Sumo sneered, and his eyes burned with the last bit of anger. However, it was more like the last radiance of a setting sun. He was not resigned to this. He could not die. That was because he was not alone. He represented the former 3 Stars River. He was a lotus soul, and he did not live for himself. He had not gone to save AMU. Ever since he reincarnated, he had gone through untold hardships to reach the peak venerable realm again. However, he was actually going to die today. He was going to die before he could succeed. The anger in Sumo's eyes suddenly rose. At this moment, he no longer had the strength to stop everything. In fact, he could not even deduce the forbidden map. However, he still had a method. He could let himself die together with the other party. Whoosh! Puff! When he looked again, Sumo's expression was ferocious, and then he suddenly spat out a blood sword. The blood sword was not aimed at the black and white swordsman, but directly landed on the demonic boat. It was a streak of soul blood. Self-destructing divine weapon. That was Sumo's choice at the last moment. Originally, the demonic boat was already shaking and unstable. It could barely hold on under the many forces. At this moment, it had a radius of 100 zhang. Whether it was Sumo, the 7th swordsman, or the 11th swordsman, they were all within the area of the demonic boat. Therefore, Sumo made up his mind and chose to self-destruct the demonic boat. That way, no one would be able to escape. With the soul blood as a guide, the golden bloodstains directly detonated the demonic boat. Boom! Boom! Rumble! The demonic boat was an existence of the 3 realms Lianbo level. In the 3 realms, only the 9 coffins could compare to the demonic boat. The demonic boat, the devil's ship. It was an eternal object left behind in the three realms' many cycles of reincarnation. It had experienced many tribulations without being destroyed. On this day, it was actually self-destructed by Sumo. Boom! Crack! The demonic boat's self-destruction was far more powerful than the explosion of the 12 swordsman's divine weapon. They were not on the same level at all. Black energy surged and immortal energy surged. It was as if several worlds had exploded at the same time. The 7th swordsman and the 11th swordsman did not sheath their swords. That was because they were prepared to die. At the moment when the demonic boat self-destructed, they still stabbed at Sumo. They would not rest until they were dead. However, the demonic boat's self-destruction directly swallowed them. At that moment, they were like two birds, one black and one white, fearlessly rushing into the sea of fire. Burn, burn, destroy, destroy. Incinerate everything. The demonic boat's self-destruction caused the entire interstellar barrier to fall into a state of turmoil. It triggered the entire interstellar barrier's power into a frenzy. Whoosh, whoosh, with the demonic boat as the center, a black hole instantly spread out. Wave after wave of spiritual power surged outwards and continued to stack on top of each other. In the surroundings, countless interstellar floating continents were directly turned into interstellar dust. The demonic boat's self-destruction was like a purification. The entire barrier was millions of miles long, but it was extremely narrow and long. At this moment, it was directly washed by the tide of immortal energy. The demonic boat shattered into pieces. The power of self-destruction filled the entire space. Everything was destroyed. Sumo was long gone, and at the edge of the glazed world stood a gray-robed cultivator. He held a long sword in his arms, coldly watching everything. Although he was wearing a gray robe, he was a member of the black and white swordsmen. However, he was a Lotus Knight. He was a trump card left by the black blind swordsman. He was the 2nd swordsman. If the previous 4 had not killed Sumo, he would have made a move. At this moment, there was no need. This time, the black blind swordsman had put in a lot of effort. The Demon King is only SOSO. The 2nd swordsman looked at the great waves within the barrier and said lightly, "But the price of this battle is really not small." With that, he turned and walked into the glazed world. He had seen Sumo's fall with his own eyes. The demonic boat's self-destruction completely changed the shape of the barrier between Dust Net World and Glaze World. Within the entire barrier, a relatively long and narrow black tunnel that connected the two worlds appeared. From then on, this tunnel was called the Demon King's Path. The 2nd swordsman left. However, he did not see that beside the Demon King's path, a ray of light flew past. The Lotus Knight also could not see that ray of light because its speed surpassed time. Chapter 924. Time could not be seen, but it could be seen. It could not be touched, but it could be touched. Time was the most mysterious thing in all the realms. It was shapeless and tangible. It was an existence that could not be surpassed, and nothing in the world could walk out of its oppression. However, there were people in all the realms who could surpass time. It was because his speed was fast enough, fast to an inconceivable degree, fast to the point where he could travel through time. Sumo's self-destruction of the demonic boat was an unsolvable situation. The interstellar barrier was a special space without an owner. Therefore, even a Lotus Knight might not be able to save Sumo. Mr. Rin was fishing peacefully by the Guanshur Lake in Fallen Mortal Town. Because there were no ripples at the Guanshur Lake, even Mr. Rin could not detect Sumo's crisis, let alone others. The interstellar barrier was a gray area. It had many space-time cracks that could dissolve a lot of power and make everything disappear. This was also the main reason why Black Blind Hermit had to make a move on the interstellar barrier. Whether it was in the dust realm, the wisdom realm, or even the glaze realm, killing Sumo could trigger a battle between Lotus Knights. That was definitely not a situation he wanted to see. It was best to settle Sumo's matter below the Lotus Knight level. At this time, the 2nd swordsman had already sent the news of Sumo's death to Black Blind Hermit. The unknown place. Black Blind Hermit sat cross-legged. Only 8 of the 13 soul lamps around him were left. That meant that only 8 of his black and white swordsmen were left. Although the price was not small, he was finally eliminated. Black Blind Hermit sighed and said to himself. He seemed to be relieved, but also infinitely desolate. Black Blind Hermit was a person that no one could see through. However, Sumo did not die. The moment the demonic boat self-destructed, Sumo was lifted up by a sudden force. At the same time, all his treasures returned to the Cosmos sack. Sumo felt that he was being carried by someone. Then, everything in front of him suddenly disappeared. Sumo could not see his surroundings at all. He did not even know what had happened. Countless stars flew past him on both sides. They were faster than shooting stars. His speed was also unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, they had traveled tens of millions of miles. Sumo felt that even the magic boat couldn't jump as fast as this. No matter how fast the magic boat was, it still needed some time. However, his speed seemed to have surpassed the speed of time. He saw that his wounds were healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was a rather miraculous scene. What was going on? That was because this kind of healing didn't seem like ordinary healing. Instead, it was more like the reversal of time. Sumo saw that the bloody hole on her body was gradually shrinking. In the end, the black sword's remnant light was pulled out of his body and instantly dispersed. Sumo's body had completely recovered. It was similar to when Sumo used the space-time reincarnation diagram. However, Sumo definitely did not deduce the forbidden diagram. At the last moment, he didn't have the chance to deduce the forbidden reincarnation diagram. The wound healed. However, Sumo didn't stop, or rather, the person holding him didn't stop. Sumo could feel the changes in his surroundings. The changes were sudden and there were no transitions. He seemed to be switching between different space-time. It was similar to when he entered the soul storage altar. However, the current situation was much faster than that, and there were more space-time. Sumo also had a strange feeling. He felt that he hadn't left the galactic barrier. He seemed to be flying in place, and space-time passed through his body. In that moment, he swam between the cracks of space-time like a fast fish. At the same time, he could feel someone behind him. He was pushing Sumo. Whoosh! The space-time transitions did not stop. At this time, Sumo had completely lost the concept of time. An unknown amount of time passed. A wind-like sound reached Sumo's ears. It seemed more like an illusion. Then, the scenery in front of Sumo suddenly changed. The space-time in front of him finally stabilized and stopped changing. It was a simple and ancient town. The town was green and ancient, backed by a high mountain and surrounded by a lake. The mountain seemed to be extremely close. Half of the mountain was green, and only the peak had a tinge of snow. It was quiet and solemn. The lake had faint ripples that reflected everything, and was as blue as the sky. White clouds, blue sky. This world was pure and holy, especially that mountain. No one dared to blaspheme it, and they felt endless reverence. That was the sacred mountain of this world. It looked close, but was actually very far. This place was bright, but there were no celestial bodies in the sky. This was a world without sunlight, but it was still bright. Sumo's eyebrows raised slightly, because this world seemed somewhat familiar to him, but also somewhat unfamiliar. There were about 100 or so families in that town. The entire town was circular and built according to the terrain. The houses in the town were of different heights, mostly made of stone, and had a unique style. There were no overhanging eaves or carved beams. Instead, they were mainly square, very simple and smooth. The colors were simple and elegant, mostly white and gray. This kind of architectural style was actually very rare. At the center of the town, there was a square that was dozens of zhang wide. At the center of the square, there was a black stone pillar that reached the sky, straight into the clouds. That stone pillar was more like a totem. Sumo stood on a small hill outside the town. He could clearly feel the ground under his feet. At this moment, Sumo directly turned around. He looked again, and behind him stood a youth in ragged clothes. At that moment, Sumo could not help but be slightly stunned. He felt as if he had seen his past self. That youth looked no more than 17 or 18 years old. He looked like a beggar, and his clothes were tattered. However, that youth was definitely not the past Sumo. His body emitted a powerful aura. It was a heroic spirit, a natural heroic spirit. The youth's face was extremely handsome, and the corners were unusually clear, as if they were carved by a knife. He gave off a feeling of determination and courage. Even though his clothes were tattered, it could not conceal his temperament. He was a natural-born member of the royal family. However, Sumo did not know him. However, he was somewhat familiar with the temperament that the youth emitted. "Thank you, Your Excellency, for saving my life." Sumo cupped his hands at the youth and then bowed deeply. "Underworld Supreme, you are too polite." The youth looked at Sumo with a somewhat complicated expression. It was nothing. Underworld Supreme? Sumo was indeed the Underworld Supreme. However, very few people use this title now. It seemed that this youth was very likely from the Three Realms era. Sumo sized up the youth again, and a thought flashed in his mind. "You are a member of the Three Realms celestial race?" The youth nodded and smiled faintly. It is rare that the Underworld Supreme still remembers one of the celestial race of the Three Realms. "That's right, my name is Ji Guang. Now, I am the only celestial race. This is the Divine King Chess Realm. However, we are now in the former world. All of this is just an illusion." Chapter 925. Ji Guang. Sumo was slightly taken aback. In truth, she had never seen this young man before. That was because only AMU and Li Shui had interacted with Ji Guang in the Three Realms era. Although Ji Guang had the bloodline of the Divine King of War, the other cultivators of the Three Realms did not know about this young man who had chased after time. The Divine King Chess Realm was a special small world in the Three Realms. "Is this the world left behind by the Divine King?" Sumo asked. "Yes." Ji Guang smiled bitterly. "It could be said that the Divine King died at your hands. But you did not obtain the Divine Casket. So, he used the last of his powers to leave this world." "Yes." Sumo nodded. "I did invade the God Realm back then. The God race was indeed overthrown because of me. Actually, you didn't have to save me." Ji Guang looked at the small town in the Chess Realm and shook his head with a bitter smile. "Underworld Lord, that is all in the past. Back then, AMU broke the karma and reborn the Three Realms. At that moment, all the grudges disappeared with the shattering of the roulette." "Thank you." Sumo nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. That was because it was indeed the Underworld Lord who led many meditation cultivators and almost destroyed the God race of the Three Realms. The Three Realms were reborn, but only the Chess Realm remained unchanged. That was AMU's promise to me. Therefore, the Divine King Chess Realm was the only place in the Three Realms that had not been reorganized. It was a part of the Xing River Realm, but it maintained its original appearance. Ji Guang's eyes showed a look of reminiscence. "I have a wife. Her name is Anya. Look, it's that girl." As he spoke, Ji Guang pointed at the small town not far away. Sumo looked in the direction of Ji Guang's finger. At that moment, many people had gathered in the square of the small town. There were old people, women, children, and of course, many strong men. Their clothes were quite special. It was an ancient and noble attire, but at the same time, there was a hint of mystery. Be it the old or the children, all of them had delicate features. Their eyes were as black as ink, like fairies. The God race was a special race. There was a special aura about them, mysterious and noble. There seemed to be some kind of ceremony going on in the field. In the center of the square, a white-haired, black-robed old man was raising his hands above his head. In one of his hands was an ancient scepter. From the looks of it, he was a priest. The old shaman faced the black stone pillar in the middle of the square and muttered something. However, Sumo did not know what he was talking about. However, the old priest's expression was rather solemn and pious, as if he was praying. Among them was a beautiful girl who was no more than 16 or 17 years old. She was dressed in white and looked extremely beautiful. Although everyone in the town had angelic faces, she was also an angel among angels. Her cheekbones were high, and her eyes were deep-set. She had large eyes with long lashes. Her thick black hair draped over her shoulders, and she wore a plain garland on top of her head, without any other ornaments. The girl was barefoot, revealing a pair of jade-like feet that were as exquisite as ivory. The young girl had a very natural and healthy beauty. Holy and elegant, the young girl also knelt there with extreme devotion. However, the young girl's brows were slightly furrowed, as if she could not calm herself down. "She is my wife, Anya," Ji Guang said. "However, she has not met me yet. They are performing a ceremony to search for the power left behind by the King of Gods." Sumo nodded when she heard this. Hum, 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 hum. At this moment, everyone was uttering a strange prayer. The old priest in black who was presiding over the ceremony suddenly uttered a long string of strange incantations. Then, he waved the scepter in his hand. Whoosh! A ray of white light spread out like a flame and shot directly at the stone pillar. Once again, the black stone pillar was stimulated by the flame and instantly glowed brightly. It was a rather strange kind of divine light. The light was divided into 7 colors, like a long rainbow. Sumo remembered that the light was very similar to a Taoist technique that AMU had used in the past. That was the 10,000 deities killing technique. Everyone in the town was overjoyed, because that kind of 7-color divine light represented auspiciousness and success, great luck and great fortune. God will protect us forever. The old priest in black was full of smiles. "Where are you?" Sumo was puzzled. Back then, AMU and I were still in the space-time rift. However, she and I will soon meet in the remnant of the God domain. Ji Guang smiled. Then, Sumo felt the town in front of him begin to blur. Then, he was once again immersed in the feeling of flying. Everything around him was changing rapidly. He saw Anya going on the road alone, heading straight for the mountain in the distance. Then he saw AMU, saw Ji Guang, and saw the last divine will inheritance of the King of War. He saw the seal of the King of God's chess realm open, and saw Ji Guang and Anya become the King of Gods and Queen of Gods. However, all these scenes were like flowing water. They did not stop, but they appeared clearly one by one. The real Ji Guang had been standing next to Su Mo the entire time. He looked at everything calmly, because he did not know how many times he had stood in the tunnel of time. All these years, he had been relying on this to survive. These are all scenes from the past. How did you do it? What happened after that? Sumo asked. "I am the youngest son of the King of Gods," Ji Guang said. "During the war in the divine realm, I was too playful and did not stay in the inner realm. Since then, I have been very regretful. So, I kept running, wanting to surpass time and return to the past to change everything. Surpass time, return to the past, and change everything." Sumo could not help but be shocked, because this was an extremely bold idea, but it was almost impossible to achieve. From Sumo's point of view, even AMU's forbidden map of time might not be able to truly return to the past. Hee hee. Ji Guang nodded, then smiled bitterly. "Isn't it a bit ridiculous? Actually, I did it. I can bring you back to the past now. However, we can only watch, but we cannot change it." Ji Guang's voice was filled with helplessness. Sumo did not say anything. However, he understood that kind of pain. After crossing thousands of mountains and rivers, he thought he had reached the end. However, he found that everything was an illusion. According to the ancient records of the Protoss, the descendants of the ancient Protoss were lost in the godly King Chess realm in the 8th era of the Divine Light clan. Holy Maiden Enya crossed the sacred mountain and met the god. She was bathed in heavenly light and awakened the god's territory. She revived the power of the god's descendants and died together with the god. After the 3 realms were overturned, the 6 paths were reborn, and the chess realm existed forever, Ji Guang said, as if he was reciting from a book. At this moment, what Su Mo saw was a scene of peace. The entire godly King Chess realm was under the rule of Ji Guang and Enya. The people were happy, and the realm was peaceful. Children, women, and the elderly all had happy smiles on their faces. The godly King Chess realm was definitely a worry-free and happy world. Sumo and Ji Guang walked in time. Light, victory, hope, freedom, happiness, glory. The ancient god gazed at his people. Children, please always remember love and kindness. Spears, swords, and shields are not our surnames. Everything is for the Protoss to fly freely in the endless sky. At this moment, Ji Guang was chanting loudly with tears in his eyes. It was the blessing and chanting of the god. Eternal life, Ji Guang said. That was the promise of the Creator, AMU. For tens of millions of years, the chess realm was indeed fine. However, it was destroyed in the end. Izong the Purifier devoured it. Sumo raised her eyebrows. The scene in the chess realm began to shake. All the happiness was shattering. That's right. Ji Guang's eyes turned cold. At the end of the day, the chess realm is a part of the Three Realms galaxy. If the skin doesn't exist, how can the hair attach? That devouring power was extremely terrifying. Ji Guang said, back then I didn't have the ability I have now, so the entire Protoss. I was the only one left. Whoosh, the wind blew, and the entire chess realm began to truly shatter. Chapter 926. The chess world was broken piece by piece. It was really like a chessboard, with a total of 361 areas broken one by one. Every piece was broken cleanly and neatly. The Protoss were a race that pursued peace. They hated war. Every time they fought a war, they were forced to fight. When it was broken, the smiles on the faces of children, women, and old people froze almost instantly. They were not prepared for the arrival of this disaster at all. In fact, many of the people of the galaxy were the same. All the happiness and joy froze in an instant and then shattered. Time froze at that moment. In fact, Sumo's memory did not have the final appearance of the Three Realms being broken, because the Three Realms was finally broken after his death. Therefore, his cheeks were tense at this time. Looking at a spot, you can see the whole picture. At that moment, Sumo could imagine the appearance of the entire galaxy being broken. Perhaps the slight difference was that the galaxy was vaster. Its ultimate destruction should be a relatively long process. However, the longer the process, the more painful it would be. Once, the helplessness and fear in the face of death must have filled the hearts of every person in the galaxy. Sumo's eyes were cold with anger. That kind of destruction is unstoppable. Ji Guang said, I wanted to take Anya out, but I couldn't. She died with the people of the Protoss. At this time, in the fast-moving picture, Anya, dressed in queen's clothes, was holding a commoner's child tightly. Her expression was soft and without fear. She was still comforting the child. At that moment, Anya knew that she was going to die. However, at the last moment, she did not choose to draw her sword because she was destined to be swallowed up. She saved her last smile for Ji Guang. Ji Guang, my king, you must live. Those were Anya's last words. Then, they were swallowed up by the power of the other world. Isn't she the eternal realm? Sumo said, the eternal realm can be reincarnated. The Protoss do not pursue power. Besides, we have never been disturbed in the galaxy era. Ji Guang said helplessly. Love and kindness are the pursuit of the Protoss. The Protoss are happy. Perhaps in the chess world, we do not want to make progress. Ridiculous, right? Sumo shook her head bitterly. In fact, was the pursuit of the Protoss wrong? They don't do evil. They don't cause trouble. They are kind and benevolent. What's wrong with that? It was this world that was wrong. Apart from the God King, the God race doesn't have enough power. Ji Guang continued. At that time, I had just broken through to the eternal realm and naturally didn't have the ability to resist everything. However, I relied on my absolute speed to survive for the time being. Are you at the Exalt realm now? Sumo gazed at Ji Guang as she spoke. Ji Guang nodded. 5th stage, Venerable Realm. It's just that this level of cultivation doesn't seem to be able to do much within Izong. Oh, Sumo was stunned. Why? Your speed is an absolute killing technique. No. Ji Guang shook his head with a wry smile. I can fight anyone below the Lotus Scholar level. He didn't dare to say that he would emerge victorious in every battle. However, cultivators who can fight against me have to be at least at the peak of the venerable realm. But against a lotus warrior, I have no advantage. My speed is useless against Rensure, because the space of 100 zhang around a lotus warrior can belong to him. 100 zhang in front of me is the world of laws of the lotus warrior. My speed will slow down, unless I also become a lotus warrior. Then become a lotus warrior. Sumo looked at Ji Guang and said, "Hee hee." Ji Guang laughed bitterly. How can it be so easy to become a lotus warrior? Not easy doesn't mean impossible. Sumo said, "Ji Guang, do you want to reforge the God domain?" "Of course." Ji Guang said, "Do you want to resurrect the person you love?" Sumo asked again. "Of course I want to." Ji Guang looked at Sumo. "But how is that possible? Right now, I can travel to almost any past I want to return to. However, nothing can be changed. They are frozen in the tunnel of time and space. I can only look at them over and over again. I can't do anything." Ji Guang's expression was extremely pained, because sometimes it was extremely painful to relive those beautiful memories of the past and not be able to go back. Ji Guang had fallen into a cycle of self-torture. "Ji Guang," Sumo said to Ji Guang, "actually, you haven't been enlightened." "Oh." Ji Guang was stunned. In fact, Ji Guang's path of cultivation had almost no one to guide him. Therefore, he had always relied on self-enlightenment. His experience could not be compared to AMU and Sumo at all. AMU and Sumo had both experienced countless tribulations. In this regard, Ji Guang was like a child who had not experienced too many trials and tribulations. "Please guide me, Dark Supremacy," Ji Guang said. "Ji Guang, you can look back at the past, but don't always think about changing the past. Because what we really want to change is the future, and to the future, the present will definitely become the past. Therefore, as long as we grasp the present, we can change the future. You have to understand this point." Sumo's expression was firm, giving people a kind of strength. "Oh," Ji Guang frowned. There was actually a kind of melancholy in the bloodline of the god race. Ji Guang was the youngest son of the divine king. When he was young, he lost his parents and clansmen. Deep in his bones, he was full of melancholy. Therefore, he had always blamed himself and wanted to go back to the past. He had a kind of obsession with the past, which was actually also a kind of escape. However, when he really went beyond time and went back to the past, he found that he could not change anything. Therefore, Ji Guang became even more depressed. Ji Guang loved the god race, and he loved Enya. Ji Guang was different from AMU and Sumo. He was not the lotus soul of this world. Although he was kind, he was not as tough, persistent, and brave as AMU and Sumo. That kind of love became an unbearable weight in his life. He could only forget the pain when he was running and wallowing in the past. Grasping the present can change the future. Ji Guang still looked at Sumo blankly. "Dark Supremacy, can my clansmen and you come back? You always go back to the past. Can you make them come back?" Sumo asked. "No," Ji Guang said. "Since you can't change the past, then you should grasp the present and look forward to the future." Sumo said, "Ji Guang, you should understand that only when you climb over the mountains will you know what is on the other side. Above the supremacy, there are the lotus warriors. Above the lotus warriors, there are the almighties. And above the almighties, there may be all living beings. There is actually no end to cultivation. However, I firmly believe that as long as there is enough cultivation, everything can be changed. I also want to rebuild the galaxy, and I also want my loved ones to come back to life." Sumo's words were loud and clear. In fact, he was enlightening Ji Guang, but wasn't he also encouraging himself? He wanted to restore the galaxy. He wanted the 7 lords to come back to life. He wanted Xiao Huang to come back again. However, could Sumo really do all of this? He was not sure himself. However, Sumo kept moving forward. He never retreated. He would ask for the result of the chase. Ji Guang kept running, and so did Sumo. It was just that their mentality and methods were different. Ji Guang listened to Sumo's words and was stunned for a while. His eyes gradually became clear, because what Sumo said was the truth. Then Ji Guang placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply to Sumo with the god race's etiquette. Ji Guang thanks the dark supremacy for enlightening me. Whoosh! At this time, they had already entered the colored glass world. Chapter 9:27. Ji Guang's speed was inconceivable. If he went all out without any obstructions, he could reach any corner of the infinite worlds in an instant. Previously, he had been sprinting toward the past. He had been bringing Sumo through the cracks in time and space. At this time, Sumo's words enlightened Ji Guang. Hence, with a single thought, Ji Guang brought Su Mo through the interstellar barrier and arrived at the colored glass world. This is the Lazuli world. Sumo stared blankly at the starry sky. Everything around her was empty and unfamiliar. To be precise, this is the Lazuli world from 3,000 years ago, Ji Guang said. As they spoke, they landed on a floating continent. This continent wasn't big, no more than 50,000 kilometers in length and breadth. It was barren and had almost nothing on it. Oh, Sumo didn't understand why Ji Guang would bring her to 3,000 years ago. Your wound hasn't healed yet. Ji Guang saw through Sumo's doubts. If I bring you back to the normal space-time, your wound will most likely explode again. So, you need to heal yourself first. Sumo was startled. My wound hasn't healed? Of course not. Ji Guang shook his head. What you saw before was only an illusion. I only changed the space-time you're in, making it seem like your wound has healed. But once you return to the normal space-time, you'll find that you're still in the same state. However, I used my speed to give you 3,000 years. I think that's enough for you to heal. 1,000 years should be enough. Sumo couldn't help but smile. This is an ownerless floating continent, Ji Guang said. Moreover, we're in the space-time of 3,000 years ago. So, no one can see us. You can heal yourself in peace. I still have some things to do. I'll return after 1,000 years. If you've recovered, I'll bring you back. Okay. Sumo nodded. Ji Guang nodded and vanished without saying anything else. Sumo didn't even see how Ji Guang had disappeared. It was as if Ji Guang had never appeared. Sumo understood. In the blink of an eye, Ji Guang knew which space he was in. Thus, Sumo picked up a blue stone, sat cross-legged on it, and began to heal her wounds. In fact, Sumo's wound seemed to have completely healed, but Sumo knew that Ji Guang's words were definitely not wrong. One must know that Sumo's wound was caused by Lianbua. This time, if Ji Guang hadn't appeared, even if his immortal heart hadn't been pierced, he would have undoubtedly died, because it was a wound that was difficult to heal. Therefore, Sumo did not dare to be careless. At this moment, he formed a seal with both hands. Then, a forbidden map appeared in his palm. The current situation was different from that day. Sumo had enough time to deduce the forbidden painting. Lianbua's injuries were different from ordinary injuries. In essence, it was a continuous release of immortal energy. Even though the Lianbua had dissipated, its power still remained. Therefore, Sumo had to seal it with the forbidden painting technique. He naturally used the restriction of samsara. It could be said that Sumo had sealed his wound in a special small space-time. That way, he could guarantee that even if he returned to normal space-time, it would not collapse again. His restriction of samsara was different from Ji Guang's running, because Sumo could really bring about change. However, Sumo could only maintain it for a short moment, or only for an extremely small area. He could use it to fight, but it was impossible to completely change the past. Looking again, Sumo's chest was rippling with colorful light, and many seals and forbidden paintings were continuously seeping into his body. This process actually lasted for a full 300 years. Then, Sumo took out the soul depository cauldron. His cosmos sack had almost everything that one needed. Therefore, he concocted 2 medicinal pills in succession that he needed. Needless to say, Sumo's medicinal pills were definitely of the highest quality. One of them was for him to consume, and the other was for War. War had been sleeping in the cosmos sack. Everything about her was motionless. Sumo did not wake her up, because he was still not sure of his own safety. He planned to find a good opportunity to first return to the soul depository cauldron and then heal Wu Air. After eating the medicinal pill, Sumo sat cross-legged to meditate. At this time, he was in the space-time of 3,000 years ago. On the surface, he seemed to be no distance from this world. But in reality, he was in a space-time crack. The glazed world was extremely vast and rich in spiritual energy. However, Sumo could not absorb too much spiritual energy from here. At present, he was still in the stage of self-recuperation. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, another 500 years had passed. Sumo felt that he had completely recovered. There were still 200 years left before the agreed time with Jiguang. Therefore, Sumo began to deduce the forbidden painting. The art of forbidden paintings was endless. It seemed that with every deduction, there would be new changes and gains. In these remaining 200 years, Sumo was not lonely. On this day, Jiguang suddenly appeared beside Sumo, almost without warning. "You've recovered?" Jiguang smiled. "I've recovered," Sumo said. "That's 200 years earlier than I had expected." "As expected of the Dark Sovereign," Jiguang said. "Then we've returned to the true glazed world." "All right," Sumo nodded. The instant Sumo nodded, Sumo felt the scenery in front of him suddenly change. This originally barren, floating continent now had some forests and rivers. At the same time, Sumo also felt the spiritual energy here. Indeed, his wounds did not feel any discomfort. "The true glazed world?" Sumo asked. "I feel that I haven't moved at all." And Jiguang smiled. 3,000 years is just a blink of an eye for me." Sumo could not help but nod emotionally. From his point of view, time had almost lost all meaning to Jiguang. "Jiguang, what's your plan?" Sumo asked. "First, I'll become a Lotus Knight." Jiguang looked at Sumo and smiled. "What you said before was very right. If I become a Lotus Knight, then everything might be different." "That's right." Sumo nodded with a smile. Looking again, Jiguang reached into his robes and took out a jade scroll, handing it directly to Sumo. "What's this?" Sumo asked. "The glazed star map," Jiguang said. "Oh," Sumo was stunned. "You want to do this in the past 1,000 years?" "Amen." Jiguang nodded. "I've been to the glazed world before, but I was in a hurry and did not pay much attention. This time, I used 1,000 years to slow down as much as possible. I've carved most of the stars in the glazed world into the jade scroll. However, I can't mark out the situation on every star in detail. I can only select the key points. However, I didn't find any traces of AMU," Jiguang said. Previously, he already knew that Sumo's purpose in going to the glazed world was to find AMU. "Thank you." Sumo took the map solemnly. "With this star map, it will be twice the result with half the effort. And the place where AMU is sealed must have a top-level Lotus Knight spell. It will not be easily discovered." "Amen." Jiguang nodded, then took out 2 more badges. They were polished from special jade and had the markings of the Protoss on them. "Dark Supremacy." These 2 badges are tokens of the Protoss. Inside each badge is a wisp of my divine consciousness. I'll leave one for you. In times of danger, as long as you crush it, I'll rush over. Jiguang smiled bitterly. "I can't guarantee anything else, but I can take you away." "Huh." Sumo could not help but laugh when she heard this. "As for the other one, if you find AMU, please crush it." Jiguang sighed. "No matter what realm I'm in at that time, as long as I can save AMU, I won't hesitate to sacrifice myself." "All right." Sumo nodded again. "I understand. I'll definitely find AMU. Dark Supremacy, take care." Jiguang will take his leave. Jiguang nodded, then placed one hand on his chest. He gave Sumo a Protoss salute, then disappeared without a trace. Chapter 928. After Jiguang left, Sumo was left alone on this floating continent. At this time, he had already concealed his venerable aura. After the battle at the interstellar barrier, Sumo had a deeper understanding of the current situation. In the Kuan butterfly secret realm, Xinlian had said that Sumo had recovered his previous cultivation, and that the top forces in Izong world were about to take action. Sumo's time in Izong was just beginning. In fact, the appearance of Swordsman 13 had already come true. However, Sumo had killed him with one slash. So, not only did that not alert Sumo, it even made him look down on the power of his own world. In the ancient Lotus Star region, Li Shui had warned Sumo that Izong Lotus Soul would not let him continue to grow stronger. Lotus Warrior was the bottom line of Izong Lotus Soul for Sumo. At that time, Sumo did not realize the seriousness of the problem. However, only this time's ambush made Sumo realize the seriousness of the problem. Wu was seriously injured. He was seriously injured and self-destructed the demonic boat. This was the most tragic battle since Sumo had reincarnated. In the end, if not for Ji Guang's appearance, he would have died. But next time, he might not be so lucky. So, Sumo had to keep a low profile in order to protect himself. At the same time, he had to do his best to become a Lotus Warrior. However, the path of a Lotus Warrior would not be easy. Previously, Sumo's cultivation was a kind of awakening cultivation, so he was unstoppable. In a short few thousand years, he reached the peak of the Venerable Realm. That was because he was originally at the peak of the Venerable Realm. And Lotus Warrior was a new realm for Sumo. Even though Sumo was a Lotus Soul with peerless talent, it would not be so easy. Lotus Warrior would probably become a bottleneck for him. Sumo knew this himself. After Ji Guang left, Sumo's divine sense covered the entire floating continent. 3,000 years ago, this floating continent was almost barren, but now it had beautiful mountains and rivers. The spiritual energy here was relatively abundant. In fact, this floating continent was very suitable for cultivators below the Samsara realm. However, there were no cultivators here. It was an ownerless place. As such, Sumo didn't leave the void continent. The place where the spiritual chi gathered was a valley with a cave. Sumo laid down a formation in the valley and carved a forbidden map, turning it into a simple cave. Sumo decided to rest here for a while before venturing deeper into the Glaze world. With the power of the demonic boat's self-destruction, he and the black and white swordsman had perished together. Sumo believed that the hidden force that wanted to kill him would think that he was dead. This might be a good situation for him. He could hide himself better. Hence, this floating continent became Sumo's temporary home. After setting up the abode, Sumo did not do anything else. Instead, she moved and displayed her mystical footwork. He wanted to return to the soul storage altar to wake up Wu-Er. After all, that was the safest place. 7 by 7, 49 steps, each step in a different space. Everything went smoothly. Sumo landed in the front cave of the soul storage altar. Then, he went straight to the back cave and entered the stone house where he refined elixirs. Then Sumo moved his mind. Wu-Er flew out of the cosmos sack and landed on the stone bed. At this moment, Wu-Er's face was still pale. It was exactly the same as when she was put into the cosmos sack that day. Wu-Er, Sumo called softly. However, Wu-Er did not respond at all. She was unconscious and her aura was weak. Wu-Er, Sumo frowned. Then, he placed his hand on Wu-Er's pulse and sent a stream of venerable energy over. Wu-Er was seriously injured and her Dan Si was empty. Sumo thought that he would be able to wake her up once he sent his venerable energy over. However, Sumo was shocked once again. That was because once his venerable energy entered Wu-Er's Dan Si, it disappeared like a clay ox entering the sea. Sumo's expression changed slightly. That was because the situation was a little abnormal. So, Sumo took out the elixir that he had refined before, put it into Wu-Er's mouth, and then used his spiritual energy to help it catalyze. Whoosh! That Dan Si was a top-notch venerable elixir. As soon as it entered Wu-Er's Dan Si, it immediately began to exert its medicinal power. Endless immortal power, like a whirlwind, went straight to Wu-Er's limbs and bones. Whoosh! Wu-Er's Dan Si was finally driven. Layers of waves rolled, and the tide was endless. Wu-Er's Dan Si began to recover bit by bit. Sumo's expression eased a little. Then, he meditated in front of the bed. That was because the medicinal power of that immortal elixir needed a certain amount of time to be completely absorbed by Wu Er. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. However, Wu Er still did not wake up. Sumo opened his eyes and furrowed his brows. In fact, Wu Er's injury was not as serious as Sumo's. After all, Wu Er only had internal injuries from overexertion, while Sumo was injured by Lianhua. Therefore, Sumo's immortal elixir could completely cure Wu Er. However, he could not figure out why Wu Er was in a coma now. The power of the immortal elixir had already been absorbed by Wu Er. At this moment, Wu Er's breathing was stable and even, and her face was rosy. Whether looking at it from the outside or the inside, she no longer had any injuries. However, Wu Er did not wake up. It was as if a person was sleeping soundly. Sumo could not see through the reason. The only fortunate thing was that Wu Er's life was not in danger. However, why would such a situation occur? Sumo did not understand. He tried a dozen more methods, but he did not wake Wu Er up. Therefore, Sumo cultivated in the cave abode of the soul, storing altar for another 100 years. In those 100 years, he cultivated every day, took care of Wu Er, and took care of the flowers and plants. The hurricane lilies had completely bloomed. They were as white as snow and incomparably crystal clear in that small netherworld. Now, as long as Sumo needed, they could be awakened at any time. That was the only thing that made Sumo happy in these 100 years. His cultivation did not improve. Wu Er was still the same and showed no signs of awakening. This situation was indeed an accident and also a predicament. At this time, Sumo thought of Wu Er and Mu Baigu's matter. He felt that perhaps it was Wu Er's incomplete memories that caused the current situation. This caused Sumo to feel a little heavy. At the same time, he could no longer cultivate in the cave abode of the soul storing altar. He had to leave the cave abode. That way, he might be able to find a way to awaken Wu Er. If not, he would consider returning to the Kuan butterfly star sea. Perhaps the Kuan butterfly race would have a way to awaken Wu Er. Therefore, Sumo left the soul-storing altar and returned to the floating continent in the Lazuli world. The floating continent had not changed much in more than 100 years. Then, Sumo took out the star map that Ji Guang had given him. The entire Lazuli world could be divided into the purple, white, gold, and blue star regions. However, these 4-star regions were not very orderly, and there were many intersections between them. Generally speaking, the purple, white, gold, and blue star regions corresponded to the east, south, west, and north. Right now, the place where Sumo was located was at the very edge of the white south star region. Suddenly, Sumo's eyes focused because he saw a place on the star map, the Southern Abyss Sea. Chapter 9:29. The Southern Abyss Sea was also known as the Minor Samsara Sea. Xianlian had once told Sumo that there was the Sea of Reincarnation in the south of colored glass. In the Izong world, some cultivators whose Tao and souls were destroyed would leave behind a trace of Tao shadow. If he was a Lotus Knight, he could use that trace of Tao shadow to bring him back to the mortal world. Sumo had pinned her hopes on the revival of Xiao Huang, Wen Muran, and the others. However, Xianlian had also said that it was a sea that only Lotus scholars could see. Sumo did not expect that Ji Guang had marked the location of the Nanyuan Sea on his star map. He did not know how Ji Guang had marked the Southern Abyss Sea, but since he was already at the south of colored glass, he naturally wanted to go and have a look. The Southern Abyss Sea seemed to be full of magic. Hence, Sumo packed up and left the floating continent. She headed for the Southern Abyss Sea, according to the mark on the star map. The colored glaze world was vast. The area of the white south starfield was equivalent to the pure land and the ancient Lotus starfield combined. The Southern Abyss Sea on the Lucky Light star map was located in the center of the white south star area. Therefore, the Southern Abyss Sea was relatively close, but he still had to pass through many small worlds. The demonic arc was gone. Sumo could no longer use it to jump through space. On the other hand, if he kept jumping through space, it would consume a lot of energy. In the end, Sumo could only summon the flying lotus throne. That lotus platform was given to him by Granny Heavenly Foxback in the Whitebone mainland. However, it had already been refined by Sumo. Its power had increased by quite a bit. Right now, the lotus platform was a samsara-grade flying treasure. Of course, it couldn't be compared to the demonic boat, but it was better than nothing. A treasure like the demonic ark was something that could only be chanced upon, because it was born from the ancient three realms. It was not a magic treasure refined by an ordinary cultivator. Therefore, in the previous battle, Sumo could be said to have suffered great losses. He definitely didn't have the ability to get another magic boat. At this moment, Sumo was standing on top of the lotus platform. She was no longer wearing a white robe. After all, the Demon King's appearance was too eye-catching. If there was another ambush like before, or if the Lotus Warriors were to make a move, then Sumo would not be so lucky. Therefore, Sumo suppressed her realm to the third layer of the rebirth realm. At the same time, he put on a green robe and changed his appearance to that of a pale-faced scholar. If it wasn't a Lotus scholar, no one would be able to see through him. After all, his disguise technique came from 7th Senior Sister Windwheel. On this point, he was confident. Therefore, it was not difficult for Sumo to conceal herself. At this moment, he was like an ordinary reincarnated cultivator roaming the worlds. The third level of the rebirth realm was neither too high nor too low in the universe. It wouldn't attract too much attention and wouldn't become the prey of other cultivators. The Lotus platform was a relatively common flying treasure in the hidden world. Therefore, Sumo was rather low-key this time. This interception made him realize the danger and the gap between them. In this sense, he would be more cautious, which was a good thing. Sumo had to first figure out some things about the Lazuli world. After leaving the floating continent, according to Ji Guang's star map, he first passed a small world formed by 18 stars. The star in the middle of this small world was blue and white from the starry sky, extremely beautiful. On Ji Guang's star map, there was a label for this star, Sangarama Star. This small world was the Sangarama realm. Regarding the Sangarama realm, there were a few lines of small characters on Ji Guang's star map. Sangarama realm, a total of 18 stars, derived from the meaning of 18 Sangarama. The realm respected the Buddhist Dharma, and the Buddhist path flourished. There were 36 immortal sections. The largest sect for skies had no venerable realm cultivators. Lusangarama Star, the Four Skies sect. Sumo thought about these two names and couldn't help but feel a bit interested. Therefore, as soon as his Lotus platform moved, he directly landed on the Sangarama planet. The Sangarama planet, compared to other stars, was not considered big. It was about the size of the former pure Saturn planet. More than half of the entire planet was covered by endless blue sea water. The Sangarama continent was concentrated in the center of the planet. The continent was surrounded by seawater. Of course, there were scattered islands in the sea. The Sangarama planet was rich in spirit energy, and the scenery was picturesque. After entering the Sangarama realm, Sumo naturally put away his Lotus platform. Then he heard endless Sanskrit chanting. The Sanskrit chanting seemed to reverberate across the entire planet. It floated faintly, but it was also clear and soothing to the ears. It was a feeling that Sumo hadn't had in a long time. After all, ever since he had been reincarnated, Sumo had either been cultivating or searching. Sometimes, he even forgot about everything around him. He didn't have time to quietly enjoy the scenery. The Sanskrit chanting made Sumo feel at ease. Then he chose to land in the largest city on the continent. Although it was called a city, it didn't have the tall city walls of an ordinary city. It was a city full of primitive flavor. However, there were 3 large golden words floating in the air above the city, Stupa City. The entire Stupa City was no more than 50 kilometers wide. It was surrounded by mountains, and on the other side was a large river that passed through the city. Inside the city, the Sanskrit chanting reverberated and fragrant mist lingered. Sumo's divine sense swept the area. In the entire city, there were millions of people, and monks seemed to occupy half of them. Many temples had been built on the streets and alleys of the city. Almost every temple was flourishing with incense, and smoke curled in spirals. Sumo appeared on a long street. On both sides of the street, there were all kinds of Buddhist shops and halls. There were many monks, as well as good men and women, most of them holding one or two Buddhist artifacts in their hands. It was bustling with activity. However, Sumo discovered that they all seemed to be heading towards the west side of the city. Sumo curiously asked a white-haired old man. He was a mortal, but he had white hair and a youthful face. He was quite extraordinary. "Sir, I see that you are all heading towards the west side of the city. Is there something big happening in the west side of the city?" "Oh," the white-haired old man couldn't help but laugh. "Young man, you're from out of town, right? What, you actually don't even know that today is the day of the bone of Buddha assembly." "Buddha bone assembly?" Sumo was stunned. "What Buddha bone?" "Of course, it's the Buddha bone. It was said that the Buddha bone came from the Fudu sea 30,000 years ago. When it appeared, it was surrounded by seven-colored divine light and boundless magic power. However, it had been covered in dust in recent years. Therefore, the eminent monk of the Four Emptiness sect chose an auspicious day to consecrate the Buddha bone. It was said that those who saw the Buddha's bone and Buddha's light would have their lifespan increased by 1,000 years. That's why we all want to rush over and bask in the Buddhist aura. The location is Futu Temple in the west of the city. Young man, you should go too. Remember to be sincere. It's best to bring one or two Buddhist artifacts. It's not about their value. It's about your sincerity." The old man smiled and said, "There are Buddhist shops on both sides of the road. You can act according to your capabilities. I'm not picky. Thank you for your guidance." Sumo said. The old man continued walking towards the west of the city. Bone of Buddha assembly? Naturally, Sumo didn't believe in gods, because he himself was a venerable one. However, since he was in time for such a meeting, he might as well go and take a look. Chapter 9:30. Sangarama Planet. In Sangarama Planet, even mortals had a lifespan of about 3,000 years. Stupa City's Stupa Temple was an ancient temple with millions of years of history. In the west of Stupa City, Stupa Temple was built on a mountain. Pavilions rose and fell, and palaces were scattered. From afar, mist rose and Buddhist light lingered. Countless virtuous men and women walked slowly along the mountain path. There were many cultivators among them, but they did not ride the wind. Instead, they walked slowly with the mortals to show their respect. However, there were reincarnation-level restrictions within 10 miles of Stupa Temple. It would be difficult for ordinary cultivators to ride the wind. By the time Sumo arrived at the foot of Stupa Temple, it was already past noon. However, there was still more than 2 hours before the assembly officially began. What kind of Buddha bones would the assembly be? Sumo's divine sense quietly spread out, but she did not find anything special. Sumo followed the crowd up the mountain. Stupa Temple was located halfway up the mountain. The mountain gate was set 100 feet in front of the temple. In front of the gate was a pair of strange beasts called Buddha dragons. They had the head of a lion, the body of a dragon, and a pair of wings. There was one male and one female. On top of their heads, there was a lotus incense burner. In each incense burner, there were 3 undying incense sticks. Each incense stick was as thick as a child's arm, and smoke rose. On the east and west sides, there were 2 symmetrical stone squares. There were banners on each stone square. The eastern stone square's banner read, "Ancient Godly Temple." The western stone square's banner read, "Sangarama Pure Land." The main gate of the mountain gate was a building with 3 rooms wide. It sat on a stone platform more than 2 feet high, and there were side doors on both sides. It had to be said that Stupa Temple's ancient and imposing mountain gate fully demonstrated Stupa Temple's status in Stupa City. All virtuous men and women who passed by the mountain gate bowed, and some even kowtowed 3 times and kowtowed 9 times. Sumo bowed slightly and passed through the mountain gate. The path leading up was 7 feet wide. On both sides, there were all kinds of ancient trees and steels, as well as statues of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. They were of different shapes and held Buddhist artifacts. In the eyes of ordinary people, they were Buddhas. In Sumo's eyes, They were a group of powerful cultivators. Moreover, these steels and sculptures weren't randomly placed. The entire passageway was covered in symbols of different colors, concealing many formations. Mortals passing through this passageway would not be aware of it, but cultivators passing through this passageway must be extremely careful. If his heart was filled with demonic thoughts, it was highly likely that his divine sense would be damaged. Of course, for someone at Sumo's level, it was as easy as walking on flat ground. At this moment, there were many people gathered in the tunnel, and there were monks on both sides directing the flow of people. Those monks were actually all mortals. They had calm expressions and calm attitudes. This surprised Sumo quite a bit. The reason for that was because the Stupa Temple was essentially an immortal sect. Its receptionist monk could be of a lower realm, but he definitely wouldn't be immortal. Child cultivator? However, the bearing and expression of the receiving monks were definitely not that of a child cultivator. Fifth Blight Warrior. Sumo's heart gave a jolt as she thought of a possibility. She couldn't help but feel surprised. Immediately after, his divine sense swept through the monks again. As expected, their dancy was vast, but also like a pool of stagnant water. These monks were indeed Fifth Blight Warriors, but now they didn't have any magic power and were like mortals. However, once they passed the tribulation successfully, they would become reincarnation warriors. Not bad indeed. Sumo nodded to herself. Buddhism was pure and could comprehend all living beings. It was a wise choice to undergo the tribulation in the Buddhist sect. Although this place lacked a trace of the mortal world's smoke and fire, there was also a trace of tranquility. Passing the fifth blight tribulation in the mortal world could be accomplished in one lifetime, but it could also be accomplished in 3 lifetimes. In Buddhism, it might be accomplished in 3 lifetimes, but it was more stable. What surprised Sumo even more was that there were so many fifth blight warriors in this Stupa temple. They had a high chance of becoming reincarnation cultivators in the future. Looking at it this way, the Stupa temple was rather powerful. Wouldn't the so-called Four Emptiness sect be even more powerful? However, there were no venerables. After passing through the passageway, there was a rather spacious square in front. From afar, there were many Buddhist halls and pavilions. Today's Buddhabone conference will be held on this square. On the square, there was a platform that was 70 feet high. At this time, the square was surrounded by all kinds of Buddhist artifacts. They were all given by the good men and women who came to worship. Many artifacts, regardless of their value, were placed around the square. It meant that all living beings were equal. There were many people around the square, some sitting and some standing. More than a dozen greeting monks were maintaining order. There were only 3 fifth blight warriors among these monks. The rest were break world cultivators. However, no matter what their level was, their attitudes were gentle and humble. Sumo took out a low-level treasure from her pocket. Her heart jumped, and a layer of Buddhist light covered it. Then, she placed it next to the platform. Ameba, Mister, please come this way. Chapter 9:31. On the wooden disc, there was a skeleton. The skeleton was covered by a red curtain. Sumo's gaze swept across the curtain, but he could not see what was inside, because there was a restriction on the curtain. A supremacy restriction? Sumo's heart skipped a beat, because it could mean that there were no supremacies in the Chalan realm. Moreover, Sumo's intuition told him that the skeleton was a woman's skeleton. A woman's skeleton? Sumo's heart was filled with an indescribable emotion. The moment the skeleton appeared, his heart throbbed. But why was this happening? He could not explain himself. Me. When the skeleton was placed, the 2 rebirth realm monks did not leave. Instead, they sat cross-legged 10 feet away from the skeleton. They clasped their hands together and softly chanted scriptures. Sumo couldn't understand the scriptures, but many of the believers around him could sing along. Sir, what scripture is everyone chanting? Sumo asked. Oh, the white-haired old man was slightly stunned. Then he laughed. Young man, you don't even know the unwithering bone scripture? That is one of the best scriptures in the Chalan realm. Chanting this scripture, the chi will not wither, the bones will not wither, and the soul will not wither. What? Sumo's expression changed upon hearing this. Unwithering bone scripture? Chi will not wither, the bones will not wither, and the soul will not wither? Wasn't this the general outline of the unwithering bone scripture that Sumo had cultivated on the bone mainland? What? The old man was stunned by Sumo's expression. Oh, there is such a powerful scripture in this world? Sumo hurriedly asked. He, the white-haired old man, said proudly. The Chalon ancient scripture delivers all living beings from suffering. Chanting it every day will bring endless benefits. Young man, if you chant along with everyone, you will be rewarded. Yes, yes, Sumo nodded. But Sumo could not understand a single word of the unwithering bone scripture that the monk was chanting. It seemed to be an extremely ancient language. Originally, Sumo was just passing by Sangharama planet and wanted to see the local people and learn more about the Lazuli world. But now, he suddenly had an even greater interest. White bone unwithering art. White bone unwithering scripture. Sumo understood that behind all the coincidences between the infinite worlds, there must be karma. Could it be that the unwithered bone incantation that he cultivated originated from the Sangharama planet? Sumo obtained the unwithering bone spell from the red dust fan. Now, the ancient mortal fan was on the puppet's body. As for the unwithering art, Sumo had long since stopped deliberately cultivating it. This was because, to the current Sumo, it was no longer considered a particularly powerful technique. As long as one was in the rebirth state, one's chi would not dry up, one's bones would not dry up, and one's soul would not dry up. However, none of that was a problem for venerable ones. However, Pure Earthstar and Jialan were very far apart. They belonged to different space-time, and the distance between them was almost immeasurable. How could there be a similar existence between them? Sumo had questions in her mind. Therefore, he perked up a little more, wanted to find out more about it. At this moment, the entire Stupa temple was chanting sutras in unison. Not only the temple, but the entire Stupa city seemed to be affected. The unwithering sutra resounded through the clouds. Sumo couldn't help but narrow her eyes, because she suddenly realized that as everyone chanted, streams of wish power had gathered in the void of the Stupa temple to form thin streams. This power was not particularly powerful. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to see it. However, Sumo discovered that they were accumulating and they were constantly growing. It did not look like the wish power of a city, but a world. At that moment, the chanting of the entire Stupa temple seemed to have opened a door. Countless amounts of power gathered from that technique. Interesting, Sumo said to herself. It seemed that this Buddhist bone assembly was not simple. It seemed to be deliberately absorbing the power of all living beings. At this moment, on the high platform, other monks appeared one after another. First, 16 monks in gray robes stood on two sides. All of them were cultivators who had lived for a lifetime. Their appearance was more like a form of etiquette. They formed a group of 4 and stood on the 4 sides of the high platform with solemn expressions. Following them were 8 monks in red kasayas. They were all at the 3rd level of the rebirth realm. After coming out in a single file, they stood next to the first 2 at the 5th level of the rebirth realm. However, they did not sit down cross-legged, and the 2 monks who led the chanting did not stand up either. However, the sound of their chanting had become softer, more like a kind of background music. Amipa. At this moment, a clear Buddhist chant spread throughout the entire Stupa temple. Looking again, the last to appear on the high platform were 3 middle-aged monks. They were also in robes, but 2 stood in front and 1 stood behind. The 2 in front were at the 7th level of the rebirth realm, while the last monk was at the peak of the 9th level of the rebirth realm. Sumo's eyes narrowed slightly, because even if there was some error in Ji Guang's marking, and there were venerable cultivators in the Sangharama realm, the peak of the 9th level of the rebirth realm was definitely a top expert. The Stupa temple actually had this kind of power. It seemed that its status in the entire Sangharama planet could not be underestimated. At this moment, the two monks walking in front on the high platform put their palms together and once again chanted Buddhist chants. In an instant, the entire stupa temple was silent except for the two monks who were still chanting. Amitba, Amitba. The two chants purified everything. At this moment, the entire stupa temple suddenly became quiet, calming everyone's heart. "Sir, who are these two?" Sumo asked in a low voice. "The two abbots of the stupa temple, Master Kong Tu and Master Kong Xiang. They are the true Buddhas of Sangarama. We must respect them." The white-haired old man had a pious expression. "Who is behind them?" Sumo asked again. "I don't know which sorcerer that is." The white-haired old man shook his head. "I have been worshipping Buddha in the stupa temple for many years, but I have never seen this sorcerer." Sumo nodded silently. "I am Kong Tu, representing all the monks of the stupa temple, to welcome all benefactors to this bone of Buddha assembly." Kong Tu put his palms together and looked around. His gaze was very gentle. "The Dharma is boundless, shapeless, and formless. Today's bone of Buddha assembly will be completed by my senior Kong Jian." Kong Tu moved to the side, and the monks behind them took a step forward. Senior Kong Jian has been in seclusion for 10,000 years. Today, the bone of Buddha will come out. The light of the bone of Buddha will illuminate all living beings. Anyone who sees the light of the bone of Buddha today will be blessed and live a long life, with immeasurable merit, Kong Tu said and directly retreated to the side. Kong Jian did not say much, only putting his palms together and bowing to all living beings. Sumo noticed that this monk at the peak of the 9th level of the rebirth realm seemed to have a special mark between his eyebrows. It seemed to be the word Kong. Following that, there was no complicated ceremony, nor any trivial process. Kong Jian walked directly to the stone table and then formed a seal with his hands. Rebirth seal. Sumo's eyebrows twitched. That was because Kong Jian had used a reincarnation-level Dharma spell right from the start. If it was just to lift the curtain, there was no need at all. However, that monk Kong Jian was extremely cautious. Whoosh! Looking again, the red curtain covering the bone of Buddha floated up. A faint white light suddenly spread out. It was indeed a female skeleton, sitting cross-legged. The most peculiar thing was that within her eye sockets, there was an endless faint white flame. At the moment that the female skeleton was lifted, two red shadows quietly landed in the stupa temple. Chapter 9:32. Sikong sect, the number 1 sect in Sangarama Temple. In fact, in most cases, it was only passed down by word of mouth among some Sangarama cultivators. The Sikong sect was a mysterious existence to the relatively low-level cultivators of Sangarama world. The Sikong sect was a parasitic existence. Normally, only rebirth-level cultivators would know about this phenomenon. If their level was not high enough, they could not understand the structure of this parasitic world. The space where the Sikong star was located was completely different from Sangarama planet. However, it existed because of Sangarama planet. From the perspective of Haoyu, it could be said that the Sikong star was in the shadow world of Sangarama planet. On Sangarama planet, Monk CG looked at Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shunming's transformation and was full of praise. The demonic monarch's secret technique is incomparably mysterious. Monk CG's words were mostly sincere. He was at the 3rd stage of the Venerable Realm and was definitely a powerful cultivator. However, it was the first time he had seen a secret technique like Sumo's that could change the appearance of others and make it so that high-level cultivators could not see through it. Demon King, your technique is really good. Shunming also smiled and said, "If there is a chance, can you teach me?" "Sure," Sumo said. "Insignificant skill," Wang Yu said lightly. In her eyes, Xiao Luo was not as good as AMU. What's more, this Wind-Wolf's secret technique was really ineffective against her. When the ghost eye was opened, Shunming was still Shunming, and Sumo was still Sumo. Hee. Sumo smiled faintly and did not care. However, you must be careful not to speak when you see others. If you really want to speak, Don't use your own voice. Just now you have all heard the voice of Sea Tong and Four Eyes. It should not be a problem to imitate it. Umaba, I understand. Shen Ming put his hands together and pretended to be serious. At that moment, it was exactly the same as Sea Tong. What do you think? Shen Ming giggled. Not bad. Sumo said. You can pass off the fake as the real one. Is it fun to flatter each other like this? Wang Yu rolled her eyes at Su Mo and Shen Ming. If you're not going to the Four Emptiness Temple, I'm leaving. If you're going, can you stop dawdling? Shen Ming stuck out his tongue. She was both afraid and in love with Wang Yu. Because the tears of the river of forgetfulness back then, Wang Yu's personality was not gentle. Back in the magical fantasy mansion, Wang Yu's words were absolute. She did not dare to disobey Wang Yu's words. Of Wang Yu. Tong. She did not dare. All right, let's go. Su Mo smiled and said to Four Desolations. Four Desolations, open the passageway. When we arrive at the Four Emptiness Temple, we'll pretend that we've completed our mission and return. As for the other matters, you can act according to circumstances. At this moment, Sumo had already materialized an ancient wooden tray. He was like Kong Jian, holding the ancient wooden tray with fake white bones on it. However, the white bone wasn't completely fake because it was transformed from Sumo's own skeleton puppet. As you command, Monk CG bowed to Sumo. Now, he had no other choice. The soul blood was in Sumo's hands. Only by doing his best to help Sumo would he have a chance at survival. Looking again, Monk CG started to form seals with his hands. In an instant, a secret door appeared in the void. It was exactly the same as the formation that appeared when Monk for Solitude came just now. Inside the black hole, there was a dim light. Monk CG was in front, followed by Sumo, followed by Shen Ming, and finally Wang Yu. The length of the space-time tunnel did not matter. Even Sumo did not have a clear concept of time in the space-time array. He only felt that after less than a quarter of an hour, their eyes lit up. Moonlight? That was Sumo's first reaction. Oh, what a big moon. Shen Ming said as quietly as he could. At this time, they had already stepped out of the space-time array. In the void, there was indeed a supermoon. Moreover, it was blue, emitting a very enchanting blue light. It hung in the void, making everything look like a dream. It was a beautiful scene. On a mountain not far away, there was a group of very old temple buildings. That blue moon is actually planet Sangarama. Monk for Solitude said, however, if you search for planet Sangarama in that direction on planet 4 Void, you will never find it. It can be seen as an illusion. At the same time, it is the only visible star on planet 4 Void. Almost all of the spiritual energy on planet 4 Void comes from planet Sangarama. Oh, Sumo couldn't help but frown. But the spiritual energy on planet 4 Void is much denser than on planet Sangarama. Of course. Monk for Solitude laughed. Because 3/4 of the spiritual energy on planet Sangarama is supplied to planet 4 Void. This is the relationship between the bright and dark stars of Lazuli world. Sumo and the others listened and nodded. That temple in front, is that the 4 Void sect? Sumo asked. That's right. 300 miles ahead is the 4 Void Mountains 4 Void Temple. Monk for Solitude said, usually the 4 Void sect doesn't care much about anything on planet Sangarama. On the 18 planets of planet Sangarama, there are existences like Fudu Temple. On the surface, they look like independent sects, but behind them is the 4 Void sect. There don't seem to be many disciples of the 4 Void sect. Sumo narrowed her eyes and looked at the ancient temple in the distance. She spread out her divine sense and sensed that there weren't many disciples in the temple. 3,000 Buddhas, 1 venerable per 100. Monk for Solitude laughed. What do you mean? Sumo said. The entire 4 Void sect actually has no more than 3,000 disciples. These disciples are all direct disciples of the 4 Void sect. Their cultivation is profound and their potential is huge. And for every 100 people, there will be 1 venerable. Monk for Solitude explained. 1 venerable per 100? Sumo couldn't help but frown. Such a rate of venerable attainment was unheard of, because there weren't many cultivators who could become venerables from the rebirth realm. But now, there are a total of 12 venerables in that ancient temple, but there are 3,372 other disciples. At this moment, Wang Yu, who was behind them, said plainly. When he said this, Sumo was still fine, because she knew how powerful Wang Yu's ghost eye was. Monk for Solitude's face was full of shock, because there was a peak venerable level formation on the Four Void Mountain. Even Sumo might not be able to investigate everything so clearly at this moment. 3,000 Buddhas, one venerable per 100 is just a saying. Of course, the Sikong temple was exaggerating. Miss, you don't have to be so calculative. Monk for Solitude smiled and explained, now, there are still a few venerables wandering outside. Now, excluding me, there are still Sitong and Simu. There should be a total of 15 venerable level cultivators in the Four Void sect. Since that's the ratio, it's not normal. Sumo thought for a while and said, I'm afraid it's because of that Black Lotus quickly becoming a venerable. Otherwise, it's impossible to have such a ratio. Demon King is wise. Monk for Solitude let out a long sigh and said, that's right. Actually, in the cave abode at the back of the Four Void Mountain, there has always been a Black Lotus. Cultivators above the 7th level of Rebirth Realm in the Four Void Temple can go there regularly. With the Black Lotus, our cultivation speed will increase by leaps and bounds. Unfortunately, this will make your foundations unstable. It's like pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Sumo frowned and said, you will only become tools and puppets. In the end, you will be exhausted and it will be hard for you to attain Tao. Hee. Monk for Solitude looked at the Four Void Temple from afar and laughed helplessly, but did not say anything. Chapter 9:33. The red curtain rose and the white bones appeared. Just as Sumo expected, there was a skeleton woman on the ancient wooden plate. The entire skeleton was in a meditative posture. There was a faint halo of light above the white bones, but it was not conspicuous. Only the flames in the eye sockets were faintly pulsating, quite special. Sumo frowned. That was because the skeleton gave him a familiar feeling. Unfortunately, nothing could be seen from a set of white bones. Whoosh, whoosh. At this time, all the good men and women of Futu Temple bowed to the Buddhist bones at the same time. However, the mortals and the cultivators of the mortal realm all knelt on the ground, while the cultivators of the immortal realm and above bowed deeply. At this moment, the immortal and mortal levels could be seen. Sumo naturally bowed slightly. In fact, with his status, he did not need to bow, but he did not want to be too special. What surprised Sumo was the white-haired old man next to him, because the white-haired old man did not kneel, but bowed. My bones are not good. I can't kneel anymore. The white-haired old man sighed, as if talking to himself, but also explaining to the people next to him, but the Buddha is merciful. He will not blame me. Oh, hee. Sumo couldn't help but sneer in his heart, as if I would believe you. You rotten old man. At that moment, Sumo was sure that he must have misjudged. This white-haired old man was hale and hearty. To be able to go to Futa Mountain alone, how could he not kneel? The white-haired old man clearly did not want to kneel to the Buddhist bones. However, Sumo still could not see through this white-haired old man. Could it be that this old man was a Lotus Knight? Sumo was a little hesitant, because it was really hard to believe. In the small Sangharan world, she actually encountered a Lotus Knight? That was a little too inconceivable. But if he was not a Lotus Knight, how could he not see through the other? Therefore, Sumo still felt that everything was a little strange. However, this Buddhist bone assembly made Sumo feel more and more interested. She did not know if it was a blessing or a curse. Mom. At this time, Kong Jian, who was on the high platform, had already begun to recite a new scripture. Sumo still couldn't understand the scripture. At the same time, Kong Jian's hand seals changed again. It was still the reincarnation formula. Sumo narrowed her eyes. He could tell that the monk, Kong Jian, had been suppressing the aura of the Buddha bone. He controlled the Buddhist bone chi to 3 feet in front of him. On the other hand, the few rebirth-level monks in red kasayas had already formed a special boundary. In other words, the time and space between the Buddha bone and Futu temple were independent of each other. It was a top-notch reincarnation boundary. That was definitely not the so-called opening ceremony. Sumo was sure. Unfortunately, the crowd of mortals couldn't see anything. Even cultivators below the rebirth realm couldn't see any clues. At this moment, Sumo understood that there must be an unspeakable secret behind this Buddha bone light consecration. At this moment, Kong Jian's voice suddenly rose a few notches. The loud sound reverberated throughout the entire Futu temple. The chanting of the 2 rebirth-level monks, who hadn't stopped, lowered a few notches. However, the pitch of their voices complemented each other. The entire Futu temple, and even the entire Futu city, echoed with a strange response. The monks in Futu temple and all the cultivators participating in the Buddha Bone conference seemed to be involuntarily chanting. It was like a resonance, but it was also like hypnosis. Sumo was clear-headed. However, he saw that a few break-world cultivators not far away had entered a state of chanting. The white-haired old man next to him also began chanting. Unfortunately, the white-haired old man's chanting was not of the same tune as the others. Clearly, the white-haired old man was just making up the numbers. Seeing this, Su Imo followed suit and began to sing along. This process lasted for a full 15 minutes. At this moment, the entire Futu temple was like a training field. Everyone was chanting. They were numb and involuntarily chanting. Their eyes gradually became blank. With Futu temple as the center, the entire Futu city fell into this state. Everything was neat and tidy. Kong Jian was on the high platform, watching everything. An inexplicable smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. At that moment, Sumo's heart went cold, because he had a bad premonition. Looking again, Kong Jian's hand seal changed. It was a seal that Sumo had never seen before. Whoosh! A spiritual wind suddenly blew on the high platform. In the void, the power of will that had been faintly discernible was now clearly visible. They formed several rivers in the void. At the same time, a pillar of light appeared above the heads of all the virtuous men and women in Futu temple. The light of life. Everyone's life was being absorbed by Kong Jian. They gathered and appeared in the void above the high platform. What the white-haired old man had said earlier was right. It was indeed 1,000 years of life. However, it was not giving but being taken. Every mortal present had at least 1,000 years of life taken. As for the cultivators, 1/3 of their life was taken, depending on their realm. This was a massacre. However, there was no bloody light. Ba, at that moment, a compassionate Buddhist voice came from the back mountain of Futu temple. Kong Jian, stop. You will destroy all living beings in Sangha temple. You are guilty. The voice was old and sounded like an extremely old monk. However, Kong Jian snorted coldly and did not care. The seal in his hand did not stop. Not only did it not stop, but it also began to speed up. At that moment, the faces of many believers in Futu temple were pale. Some of the elders had already fallen to the ground in despair. This was because they did not have 1,000 years of life left. However, what was Kong Jian trying to do? Sumo had many questions in her mind. There was also the light of life above Sumo's head, but it was not being absorbed. At that moment, the white-haired old man suddenly said to Sumo, "He wants to devour that skeleton." Oh, Sumo was taken aback. What's the use? To advance to the pinnacle of the supremacy realm. The white-haired old man said. Sumo could not help but frown. That skeleton could help him reach the pinnacle of the supremacy realm? If that was the case, it was a huge temptation. No one at the pinnacle of the reincarnation realm could resist such a temptation. Buzz, boom. As soon as the white-haired old man finished speaking, the skeleton on the high platform was already rising slowly. At this moment, the millions of yearning and longevity energy in the void actually formed a lotus platform under the white bones. With my heart, I summon the skeleton to be reborn. At that moment, Kong Jian's hand seal changed again. At the same time, he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of soul blood. Whoosh! As soon as the soul blood was spat out, it turned into a rain of blood. In an instant, the entire sky of Futu City was dyed blood red. The Buddha bone was also covered with a layer of red light. Buzz! The Buddha bone vibrated, and the white light in its eye sockets suddenly expanded. Sigh! At that moment, a helpless sigh came from the back of Futu Temple. At the same time, a red shadow suddenly flew out from a corner of Futu Temple. The red shadow headed straight for the Buddha bone on the high platform. Instantly, murderous intent filled the air. Chapter 9:34. Within the red shadow, there was another red shadow. This was something that Su Mo had not expected. On the other hand, the monks on the high platform seemed to be prepared. They knew that today's bone of Buddha assembly would be exciting. Whoosh! 2 of the 8 rebirth realm cultivators leaped into the air. Under their robes, there were Buddhist staffs. The 2 staffs crossed each other and headed straight for the red shadow. Everything happened in an instant. At this time, other than Sumo and the white-haired old man, everyone else in the Stupa temple had fallen into a deep sleep. In other words, although they were chanting, they did not feel anything. To them, time and space were completely still. Boom! Crack! When he looked again, an immortal sword suddenly appeared in the red figure's hand. The divine sword's green light surged, its tail tens of feet long. It was a top-notch, venerable divine weapon. The red shadow flipped his wrist and split the divine sword. The green light swept past, and the 2 Buddhist staffs were cut in half. However, the green light's power did not diminish, and the red shadow had no intention of stopping. Poof! Poof! The green light was like a sickle, reaping 2 heads. The 2 round heads were filled with shock, as if they had died with grievances, because they did not expect to be killed in one move. Bang! Blood splattered everywhere as the 2 heads exploded in their shock. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. 2 cultivators at the 3rd level of the rebirth realm died in an instant. Practically at the same time, Grandmaster Kong Tu and Grandmaster Kong Xiang made their moves. They were 2 rebirth realm cultivators. Other than Kong Jian, they were the strongest experts in the Stupa temple. Heaven bind! Earth trap! The 2 monks shouted loudly. They did not use their divine weapons, but instead used their spells. In the air, 2 beams of light attacked the red shadow from above and below. It was a sealing spell. At the same time, the remaining 6 rebirth realm cultivators also used their spells. They had set up a boundary, but did not expect it to be broken by the red shadow. At this time, they tried to use their spells again to block the red shadow. However, the red shadow's spells were 1 step faster than theirs. The red figure held the sword in one hand and formed a seal with the other. Hand seals with one hand were rare to begin with. However, the red figure's speed was extremely fast. His use of a seal was breathtaking. At this moment, Sumo frowned slightly. That was because that red figure was a woman, and he had seen those hand seals before. However, he had yet to see the face of the red shadow. Who? Hua. Following the red-clothed woman's spell, the spell set up by the monks began to collapse in an instant. The red-clothed woman's body suddenly emitted a green light. The green light was like the sea, and the many Dharma forms were unstoppable. Blue Sea Inheritance. Vast Sea Manifestation Art. Sumo could not help but sigh in her heart. He could now confirm who the red-clothed woman was. However, he did not expect to meet her here. Moreover, why did she snatch the Buddha bone? Sumo was puzzled. But at this moment, the situation on the high platform changed again. Kong Tu and Kong Xiang, the 2 monks at the 7th stage of the rebirth realm, were unable to stop the lady in red. Therefore, Kong Jian finally made his move. He knew that if he had acted later, the others could have died under the red-clothed woman's sword. Kong Jian was at the peak of the rebirth realm, and so was the red-clothed woman. Buddha is merciful. Kong Jian's face was full of pity. The string of Buddhist beads around his neck suddenly flew up and swept towards the red-clothed woman. It was also a venerable divine weapon. At the same time, the female skeleton that Kong Jian had spat out a mouthful of soul blood also went straight towards the red-clothed woman. The red-clothed woman thrust the immortal sword in her hand outwards. Chi, chi, chi. Kong Jian's Buddhist beads were directly cut by the immortal sword. However, the Buddhist beads did not dissipate. However, the red-clothed woman's wrist turned, and her sword shot out like a shooting star. Bang, bang. The 108 Buddhist beads were all knocked away by the immortal sword in an instant. However, the red-clothed woman still retreated. She was not afraid of the monks of the Fudu temple, but she did not want to damage the Buddha bone. Although the red-clothed woman retreated, she was still suspended in the void of the Futu temple. Kong Jian did not attack after forcing the red-clothed woman back. He wanted to maintain a delicate balance and then complete the awakening of the Buddha bone. As long as he could devour the Buddha bone, everything would be worth it. To go from the peak of the rebirth realm to the peak of the venerable realm was something that many cultivators did not even dare to dream of. However, now that he had such an opportunity, so what if he had to suppress all the beings of the Sangha temple? Whoosh! The battle between the two sides stopped. At this time, Sumo finally saw the red-clothed woman's face clearly, especially her eyes. Her eyes were deep and bottomless, as if they contained thousands of magical powers. Wang Yu. Sumo's guess was right. The red-clothed female cultivator was indeed Wang Yu. At this time, the white-haired old man beside Sumo smiled faintly. Is that your old friend? However, you must not be impatient and do not attack first. There will definitely be others coming later. The Sangha temple still has some experts. Oh, Sumo could not help but ask. May I ask who you are? Hee hee. The white-haired old man shook his head and laughed. Don't ask me who I am. However, don't worry, we are friends, not enemies. At the crucial moment, I will lend you a helping hand. You have to get your hands on that skeleton. It is very important to you. Sumo did not understand, but the current situation did not allow her to ask more. On the high platform, the monks of the Fudu temple tightly protected the Buddha bone. Kong Jian looked at Wang Yu and asked, Female benefactor, where are you from? Why did you kill my junior brother and steal my Buddha bone? When Wang Yu heard this, she laughed coldly. Futu temple, you deceive the world. That Buddha bone did not belong to your temple in the first place. Now, you want to use the wishes and lifespan of all beings to awaken it. Then use it for your own selfish purposes. If that is the case, then everyone can take it. I also want it, why can't I? Hee hee. Kong Jian heard this, but shook his head. Female benefactor, you are wrong. This Buddha bone came from the Fudu Sea and has been enshrined in my temple for tens of thousands of years. It belongs to my temple. Now, I have gathered the power of all beings to help me ascend. After that, I will naturally give back to all beings. Why can't I? Monk, why do you have to lie to all beings? Wang Yu laughed coldly. I do not want to help all beings. I only want to use this white bone to ascend. So, I do not want to talk nonsense with you. I only want the white bone. Wang Yu's personality was indeed one that did not like to talk nonsense. So, she made her move again. Wang Yu's sorcery came from Mo Lang and Huanhua. She was confident that she was invincible in the same realm. She could even fight a first-stage venerable. Moreover, she had a backup plan. So, she had no scruples. Whoosh! Then, she gently pinched 3 fingers on one hand, and a demonic flower suddenly bloomed on her fingertips. It was the enchantment of illusory flowers. Chapter 935. Charm of Fantasy Flower. Sumo's expression changed slightly. That was because, to him, it represented a complicated emotion. In the past, in the 3 realms, the children of the desolate sea did not dare to cry at night when they heard the name of the heavenly maiden. The cultivators of the divine continent were shocked when they heard the name of the illusory flower. The fairy fantasy flower was the nightmare of the divine land. Charm of illusory flowers was one of the goddess arts. Legend had it that the enchantment of the fantasy flower was a unique species of the three realms. However, it was not an item of the sea desolate state, but a flower of the demon realm. It was the number one illusory spirit flower in the three dimensions, and it was divided into the colors of white, black, blue, crimson, green, violet, and yellow. Back then, under normal circumstances, the fairies mostly used red and blue flowers. AMU had once used the blue fantasy flower charm. As long as you have the slightest flaw in your heart, you will definitely fall for the charm of illusory flowers. Even immortals and Buddhas would not be able to escape. At this moment, Wang Yu's first move was actually a black demonic flower. A black flower bloomed in the void. Under the red light, it looked even more demonic. In an instant, 1 turned into 10, 10 into 100, 100 into 1,000, 1,000 into 1,000,000,000. Black flowers filled the sky, and a strange fragrance wafted through the air. The entire Stupa city was like a dream. At that moment, all the chanting in Stupa Temple and even the entire Stupa city came to a halt. The enchantment of illusory flowers had directly changed the situation. The expressions of all the monks on the high platform changed. Other than Kong Jian, even Kong Tu and Kong Xiang, who were at the 7th layer of Rebirth Realm, were at a loss. They all stopped chanting and entered their own illusory worlds. Demonis, Kong Jian couldn't help but shout. This time, he used a Buddhist secret technique. He had wanted to give the monks of Fudu Temple a severe warning and dispel the illusion. However, not only was it futile, 2 of the monks in the 3rd layer of Rebirth Realm pounced on him. The charm of Fantasy Flower was an invincible illusion technique. At this moment, in the eyes of the 2 Rebirth Realm monks, Kong Jian was their enemy. Who? 2 monks in the 3rd realm of Rebirth raised their staffs and smashed them towards Kong Jian. The monk, Kong Jian, could not help but raise his eyebrows. With a thought, the Buddhist beads that Wang Yu had knocked away suddenly flew back to him. Puff! There were 2 consecutive sounds. 2 Buddhist prayer beads were inserted into the foreheads of the 2 monks. At the same time, Kong Jian's hand seals changed. Looking again, the spiritual energy of the 2 monks began to be absorbed by the Buddhist beads and then poured into the woman's Buddhist bone. In an instant, the 2 monks at the 3rd realm of Rebirth Realm turned into 2 dried corpses. Even Sumo couldn't help but frown when she saw that scene. Monk Kong Jian was indeed a cruel and merciless person. One had to know that he had absorbed 2 samsara-level disciples. The white-haired old man couldn't help but laugh coldly. Buddha is merciful. At this time, Wang Yu's immortal sword attacked again. Her immortal sword was specially forged by Wang Ju. It was a top-notch venerable divine weapon. Once the enchantment of Fantasy Flowers was unleashed, all the other monks, except Kong Jian, lost their ability to fight. Even Kong Jian had to rely on a treasure to protect himself. Wang Yu's sword was extremely fast. The sword went straight for the space between Kong Jian's eyebrows. Kong Jian reacted quickly. Under his control, the woman's Buddhist bone once again blocked in front of him. Wang Yu's eyes narrowed slightly. Fear of harming the rat. However, she had been blocked by Kong Jian's Buddhist bone twice. With Wang Yu's character, how could he take such a threat? Chi. Wang Yu's sword did not change at all and went straight for the Buddhist bone. This time, it was Kong Jian's turn to be shocked. He didn't expect the red-robed female cultivator to be so ruthless. She would rather damage the white bone than stop. Whoosh! Kong Jian wanted to protect the Buddhist bone. Therefore, he moved the Buddhist bone to the left with a thought. However, this left the space in front of him wide open. Puff! Wang Yu's sword directly pierced through his right shoulder. In an instant, blood splattered. Although it wasn't a fatal wound, Kong Jian's expression changed. Between experts, a split second could determine life and death. Just now, he had dodged a bullet. However, he knew in his heart that he was no match for the red-robed female cultivator. Today, it would be impossible for him to smoothly devour the Buddhist bone. Thinking of this, Kong Jian hurriedly retreated. At the same time, he crushed a black jade slip in his hand. Whoosh! As soon as the black jade slip was crushed, endless black smoke spread out. The black smoke dispersed in the void and gradually formed a circle. A black hole appeared in the circle. It seemed to be a transportation formation. Boom! When he looked again, the black hole suddenly opened, and 3 monks slowly walked out from it. However, the 3 monks were wearing black monk robes. It was the color of the rarely seen monk robes. The venerable realm. Sumo couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. The 3 monks were all venerable realm cultivators. It seemed that Ji Guang's record of there being no venerable realm cultivators in the Qilin realm was indeed inaccurate. The 3 monks in black all put their palms together, their expressions cold. There was a mark of calm between their eyebrows. The mark was also black, looking somewhat strange and dark. As soon as they appeared, their bodies suddenly emitted the pressure of the venerable realm. The enchantment of flowers in the void was dispersed in one go. The gap between their realms was obvious. Hehe, the power behind Fudu Temple has appeared, the white-haired old man said. Oh, Sumo was stunned. The monks of the 4 Void Venerable Realm. The white-haired old man said, the 4 Void sect is the largest sect in the Qilin realm. Many of the temples in the Qilin realm are opened by their disciples. However, the cultivators of the 4 Void sect do not show themselves easily. This Futu temple is an important temple of the 4 Void sect. Sumo nodded when she heard this. Umipa. The 3 monks in black chanted at the same time. Their leader was a 3rd stage venerable, and the 2 behind him were 1st stage venerable. When Wang Yu saw the 3 venerable realm cultivators, she couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. At the same time, she suddenly retreated, maintaining a relatively safe distance from them. After all, she was not a venerable yet. Facing 3 venerable realm cultivators, how could she dare to act rashly? Senior brothers, save me, Kong Jian shouted loudly. Junior brother Kong Jian, calm down. The black-clothed monk who led the group said, you don't have to worry about anything since you summoned us here. That Buddha bone is definitely yours. We'll be waiting for you to return to the sect. Thank you, senior brother CG. Kong Jian knelt down in midair and spoke respectfully. Sumo couldn't help but ask, return to the sect? The white-haired old man said, looks like Kong Jian made a mistake and was demoted to the Fudu Temple. I think he'll return once he advances into the Exalt realm, said the white-haired old man. Who are you? Meanwhile, the monk who led the group asked Wang Yu. Me? Wang Yu laughed coldly. I'm an independent cultivator. I've come today for the Buddha bone. The Buddha bone doesn't belong to anyone. Since it can assist in one's cultivation, then it's naturally available to everyone. Ha! The monk couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this. Benefactor, you're right. The Buddha bone really is available to everyone. Today, if you can defeat us, you will be able to win. This Buddha bone belongs to you. But if I can't beat him, I'll have to go. Not only will you not be able to obtain this Buddha bone, but you will also not be able to leave. Whether it is the Sangarama planet or the Fudu Temple, they're not places where you can do whatever you want. Benefactor, think carefully, Monk 4 Desolation said calmly and coldly. If you repent now, you'll regret it. As long as you leave behind your immortal sword, we can write off everything that happened before. When Wang Yu heard this, the corners of his mouth curled up. He could not help but look into Fudu Temple. Chapter 9:36. Killing intent was everywhere in Fudu Temple. Wang Yu's gaze seemed to sweep past Sumo and the white-haired old man without stopping. However, Sumo knew that as long as Wang Yu saw her, he would definitely be able to see through her disguise. The ghost eye had a special penetrating power. It could see through all illusions better than the demon eye. However, Wang Yu did not seem to be looking for Sumo. Instead, he was only looking at the living beings in Fudu Temple. Poor believers, Wang Yu muttered to himself. But at the same time, he seemed to be talking to Monk CG. All of you will be buried with your so-called faith. Amiba. Monk CG raised his brows and chanted. At this moment, he knew that the female cultivator in red would not give up without a fight. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a fluctuation in the void of Futu Temple. Another female cultivator in red appeared next to Wang Yu. Their appearance and attire were identical. At first glance, they looked like clones of each other. Monk CG and the other monks were slightly stunned. That was because these two female cultivators were clearly the same person. At this moment, Sumo could tell the difference at a glance. That was because their eyes were different. Shunming. Sumo really did not expect Wang Yu and Shunming to be here. This pair of ghosts was not ordinary. They were special existences in the three realms, and the cultivators behind them were not ordinary people. "Sister, let's kill them," Shunming said coldly. Umaba. Monk CG could also tell that they were different. He could not help but smile faintly. "Female benefactors, do you think you can kill us with your cultivation? That's impossible. It seems that you have no intention to repent. Then don't blame me for being heartless." With that, Monk CG did not personally take action. Instead, he retreated. The two venerable realm cultivators behind him took a step forward. They had calm expressions and actually bowed slightly to Wang Yu and Shunming. "Umeba, this poor monk is Sitong. Umeba, this poor monk has 4 eyes." The two monks looked refined and courteous. Their dharma was profound, but there was a black aura behind them. What they look like is completely different from what they look like inside. Sumo's gaze froze. In theory, Wang Yu and Shunming were no match for the two first-stage martial venerable realm cultivators. But he also knew that their family inheritance was extremely powerful. Therefore, they should all have the ability to challenge those a higher level. However, Sumo did not dare to let her guard down. He absolutely could not let anything happen to Wang Yu and Shunming before his eyes. Otherwise, how would he explain himself to Amu and Shunyan? Chi. Wang Yu and Shunming didn't say anything else. Instead, they attacked immediately. Both of them were at the peak of the rebirth realm, but they were unable to advance. Because each of them had their own inner demons. However, their battle prowess was indeed formidable. The immortal sword in Wang Yu's hand stabbed towards Sitong. On the other hand, the spear in Shunming's hand was a long spear. At first glance, that spear looked like the Azura spear. However, Sumo knew that the real Azura spear was in Shunyan's hands. This spear was most likely forged later. However, it was also a top-notch venerable divine weapon. Whether it was in terms of spells or treasures, the two of them were definitely not bad. They could put up a fight against a first-stage martial venerable realm cultivator. However, the difference in realms was still a difference in realms. They did not have the aura of a venerable. On the other hand, the two monks, Sitong and Simu, were making hand seals at the same time. The black aura on their bodies instantly surged like dragons in clouds. Neither of them took out their treasures. Not every venerable realm cultivator had a venerable divine weapon. Of course, it was more likely that they did not think that they needed it. Whoosh! On the other hand, the black aura behind them instantly took shape. One wrapped around Wang Yu, while the other wrapped around Shunming. Wang Yu's sword and Shunming's spear were directly ignored by them. This was because the moment the two divine weapons pierced towards them, they actually disappeared from where they stood. Black escape technique. The white-haired old man saw this and could not help but sneer. The Four Emptiness sect, interesting. Sumo listened to the white-haired old man's words and did not understand what he meant. At this time, he did not ask in detail, but focused on the battle. Wang Yu and Shunming could not help but frown when their attacks failed. However, Wang Yu's eyes flashed, and she directly took a step to the left. The immortal sword in her hand stabbed forward. However, there was nothing in that direction at all in the eyes of ordinary cultivators. However, as soon as Wang Yu's sword arrived, a cry of surprise came from the void. On the other hand, the black aura in the void suddenly dispersed. At the same time, a 5-color glow appeared under Wang Yu's feet. The black aura that entangled her just now instantly dissipated. Forbidden map. Sumo could not help but secretly nod. There was actually a forbidden map and restriction under Wang Yu's feet. It was an extremely powerful defensive technique, and ordinary venerables could not enter her body. However, Sumo could not tell whether it was Wang Yu's own forbidden map or Wang Ju's. On the other hand, Shunming's side was almost in the same situation as Wang Yu's. When Wang Yu saw through the two monks' black escape technique, Shunming could also see through him. Her spear even pierced the four-eyed monk's monk robe. They had telepathy. Whoosh! The two monks, Si Tong and Si Mu, appeared at the same time, 1,000 feet away. Their expressions were no longer as calm as before. This was because Wang Yu and Shun Ming's battle prowess was somewhat beyond their imagination. On the other hand, the two monks formed hand seals again. However, the sorcery this time was clearly far more powerful than before. Black aura appeared above their heads. Moreover, the black aura gradually formed a black lotus. Black lotus! Sumo could not help but be moved. He, the white-haired old man, also could not help but sneer. Lotus suppression. The two monks shouted at the same time. On the other hand, the lotus above their heads instantly expanded. The two lotuses each occupied half of the void. It could be said that they blotted out the sky and covered the sun. The entire Stupa mountain was under their sorcery. Once the black lotus appeared, it was like the end of the world. However, the people in Stupa Temple did not feel it, and the entire Stupa city was in a state of deep sleep. It was a kind of indiscriminate attack sorcery. At this moment, the entire Stupa Temple and even the entire Stupa city was about to be destroyed. All of this was just as Wang Yu had said. All of his believers would be buried with him. However, this was a battle between venerables. Not destroying a single star was already merciful. Moreover, the four emptiness sect monks did not even consider these problems. Believers were just their tools. They were not true Buddhists at all. At this moment, Wang Yu and Shunming were actually using different sorcery. Wang Yu's body emitted a green light, and within the green light, a lotus appeared. However, the lotus was green. Shunming's body emitted a red light, and within the red light, a fire lotus appeared. Amazing! The white-haired old man could not help but praise. As for Sumo, she could see that one of them was using an ocean sorcery, while the other was using a ghost lord's immortal technique. They were both top-tier sorcery of the three realms. Boom! Boom! The four lotuses collided, and the entire Stupa temple was enveloped by a boundless force, instantly turning it into ashes. Chapter 9:37. The power of a supremacy engulfed the entire Stupa city. In an instant, many believers in Stupa temple were reduced to dust. There were only a dozen monks left in the entire Stupa temple. They were all on the high platform. Among the spectators, only Sumo and the white-haired old man were left. However, at this moment, they were all concealing their auras and hiding in a dark corner. They did not want to show themselves. At the same time, the aftermath of the battle was still spreading. Half of Stupa city had been reduced to ruins, and the number of dead was uncountable. Sumo's expression was calm, while the white-haired old man sighed. After Stupa temple was destroyed, a withered old monk appeared in the void behind a mountain. His body was actually wrapped in black chains. The old monk wore a gray robe that was full of patches. It was a robe made of cloth. He was a stage 7 rebirth realm expert. Previously, he was the one who had advised Kong Jian. Amipa, the withered old monk, had a mournful expression. He looked at Kong Jian and said, "Kong Jian, no matter where you come from, you have let down Stupa. All living beings are innocent." Senior brother Kong Yin, Kong Jian said coldly, "The path of cultivation is naturally filled with white bones. Today, I will spare your life on account of us being fellow disciples. I will release your seal, and you may leave. Spare my life on account of being a senior brother? Ha! Kong Jian, how can I be worthy of being your senior brother?" Master Kong Yin shook his head and smiled bitterly. If the path of cultivation is filled with white bones, then what is the point of cultivation? Buddhas cultivate to save all living beings, not to destroy them. How are your actions any different from those of devil? Now that Stupa is dead, how can I live alone? With that, Kong Yin formed a seal with both hands. It was an absolute death seal. There is still a true Buddha in Stupa Temple. The white-haired old man sighed softly. However, he did not make any move. That was because everyone had their own destiny. That Master Kong Yin had come to transcend all living beings. Whoosh! Once Kong Yin's absolute death seal was formed, his body emitted endless Buddhist light. The Buddhist light turned milky white. Within it, countless Buddhist lotuses appeared. At that moment, the black chain could no longer seal him. Amitabha, the Buddha, is merciful. Master Kong Yin sighed sorrowfully. I am willing to help the aggrieved souls of this battle enter the cycle of reincarnation. Boom! Hua! Kong Yin's Buddha body began to dissipate. It wasn't a self-detonation, but a gentle dissipation. The light of Buddha shone, bathing all living beings. At that moment, the entire Stupa city and even Sangarama planet were illuminated by the light. The sound of Sanskrit rose in all directions, as if transcending. Countless vengeful souls turned into white mist and returned to the cycle of reincarnation. The entire process did not take long. The 3 monks from the Four Emptiness sect didn't do much. They frowned at everything. Perhaps they still had a trace of Buddhist faith in their hearts. Therefore, they did not stop Kong Yin from attaining perfection in the end. Kong Yin was the last Buddha of the Fudu Temple and even the Sangarama planet. After Kong Yin's death, there was no Buddha in Sangarama. In the battle just now, the 4 lotuses had collided and ended in a tie. The 2 monks, Si Tong and Si Mu, stood where they were. Their expressions were normal, and their breathing was steady. On the other hand, Wang Yu and Shun Ming's faces were slightly pale. After all, there was a gap in their realms. At this moment, it was as if they were to reenact the battle just now. They would definitely not be able to withstand it. Just like Wo Er, they would definitely suffer internal injuries. Sumo raised an eyebrow. He was already holding the lotus vine in his right hand. He could make his move at any time. However, at this moment, Wang Yu and Shun Ming could not help but look at each other. Of course, they were aware of the current situation, but they still had trump cards that they had yet to use. It was impossible for 2 first-layer Martial Highness Realm cultivators to kill them. Otherwise, they would not have dared enter the Glaze realm so easily. They still had secret techniques. Wang Yu and Shun Ming were telepathically connected. They knew each other's thoughts as soon as their eyes met. When they looked again, they began to form hand seals at the same time, and their speed was extremely fast. Their hand seals were exactly the same, but the changes were complicated, and there were thousands of them in an instant. Whoosh! When they looked again, their bodies were suddenly approaching each other. In an instant, the 2 of them merged into one. 3rd layer, Venerable Realm. After Wang Yu and Shun Ming merged into one, their realms underwent a qualitative change. It was an unbelievable technique. That scene made all the monks' expressions change. They had never seen a spell like that. The technique of the 3 realms is amazing. The white-haired old man nodded and praised. On the other hand, Sumo's expression was relatively calm. That was because he knew that Wang Yu and Shun Ming were once living together. Back then, they shared the same body. Wang Yu was Shun Ming, and Shun Ming was Wang Yu. However, they were reincarnated as twins after AMU broke the karmic ties. The ghost body was a unique body. Therefore, Sumo was not surprised that they were able to merge into one. However, Sumo was slightly worried. Any technique like that must have a flaw. Otherwise, they would not have chosen to merge at the most crucial moment. It might not be a good thing after merging. Whoosh, whoosh. Meanwhile, Wang Yu and Shun Ming did not say a word. Once they merged, they chose to use their spears. 3rd layer, Venerable Realm. They did not give Si Tong and Si any chance. As soon as they saw Wang Yu and Shun Ming merging into one, their spears had already pierced forward. Their speed was so much faster than before that it was impossible to see them clearly. The power of the Venerable Realm filled the air. After merging, one of their eyes was Wang Yu's, and the other was Shun Ming's. It looked extremely strange. At that instant, Wang Yu's eye suddenly shot out thousands of rays. A technique. It was a secret technique that Wang Yu did not use before. She could only use it once against a venerable realm cultivator. At that instant, Si Tong and Si Yi felt as if thousands of Wang Yu and Shun Ming had appeared in front of their eyes. The world was spinning. It was as if they were looking at everything through a kaleidoscope. It was the ghost pupil illusion technique. Puff! While they were lost in thought, Wang Yu and Shun Ming's spears had already pierced through Si Tong's chest. Then, they turned to Si Yi. At that instant, Si Ji made his move. He was also a third-layer venerable realm cultivator. How could he watch as Wang Yu and Shun Ming killed his junior brother? He wanted to save Si Yi. He flung his sleeves. Thousands of dark swords flew out from his sleeves. Each of the swords was only 3 inches long. Each of the swords was a divine weapon of the venerable realm. Each of them looked like a dark fish, and they covered the sky. It was Monk Si Ji's secret technique. He did not use it easily. Even a third-layer venerable realm cultivator would not be able to block these flying swords. However, when she looked at Wang Yu and Shun Ming, they stretched out their left hand. Sumo could clearly see that the palm of their left hand was faintly emitting a 5-color divine light. It was a forbidden diagram in the palm. That forbidden diagram was the same as the one under Wang Yu's feet. It was a mature, forbidden diagram. At that moment, Sumo was sure that it was not Wang Yu and Shun Ming's deduction, but the protective forbidden diagrams that Wang Ju had sealed on them. Wang Ju's forbidden diagrams were invincible in all realms. Whoosh! The forbidden diagrams instantly spread out. In the void between Wang Yu, Shun Ming, and Si Ji, another space-time seemed to have appeared. Countless flying swords fell into the 5-colored light hole. They were sent away. Monk Si Ji's expression changed. He had never seen a forbidden diagram technique before. At the same time, Wang Yu and Shun Ming's spears had already pierced through Si Tong's head. Bang! Si Tong's head exploded, and his soul scattered. Chapter 9:38. 2 first-layer martial, venerable realm cultivators were destroyed. Monk Si Ji's expression changed drastically. He did not expect the 2 red-dressed female cultivators to be so powerful after merging. Whoosh! Monk Si Ji retracted his sleeve. Otherwise, his flying swords would be devoured by the forbidden map. However, Monk Si Ji was a third-layer martial venerable realm cultivator, after all. He immediately changed his attack after being thwarted. When he looked again, a black lotus suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. At that moment, Su Mo raised his eyebrows, while the white-haired old man sneered. Black lotus. It was the black lotus again. Just now, CG and CG's techniques had black lotuses. Another black lotus appeared between CG's brows. None of this was a coincidence. However, this black lotus was different from CG and CG's techniques. The reason for that was because it contained a mysterious power. It was the power of the world. As soon as the black lotus appeared, the void distorted. Wang Yu and Shun Ming's forbidden map was also distorted. The forbidden map did not dissipate, but it could not devour it like before. The 2 powers began to tangle. They each had different powers of the world attached to them. Monk CG's expression was cold. His black robe fluttered slightly. At this moment, the remaining monks of Fudu Temple were all standing behind him. Kong Jian's eyes were filled with killing intent. Wang Yu and Shun Ming's faces were pale. Even though they had the forbidden map to protect themselves, they could not merge for too long. This was also one of their weaknesses. If they continued to fight, they would definitely lose. They were powerless to fight back. Whoosh! At that moment, Kong Jian, who was watching the battle, suddenly waved his hand. 3 prayer beads flew toward Wang Yu and Shun Ming. Between experts, life and death could be determined in an instant. Kong Jian's sneak attack was enough to affect the outcome of the battle. The 3 prayer beads formed a triangular shape and looked like 3 sword rays. At that moment, Monk CG's lips curled into a cold smile. As long as they could win, it did not matter what methods they used. He believed that Kong Jian did the right thing. However, just as the three prayer beads flew toward Wang Yu and Shun Ming, a green figure suddenly appeared. He stood in front of Wang Yu and Shun Ming. When he looked again, the lotus vine in his hand split into two. Peepa, Peepa! The lotus vines were like whips, directly smashing the three prayer beads. At the same time, it transformed into a straight spear and pointed at the space between Kong Jian's brows. The venerable peak. Monk CG's expression changed drastically, because that was an existence that could destroy him with a raise of his hand. Moreover, he didn't recognize the green-robed young cultivator in front of him. In the Jialan world, other than the Four Emptiness sect, there were other venerables? That was something he had never expected. Puff! A crimson light flashed in the void. There was no doubt that Kong Jian would not be able to dodge Sumo's lotus vines. At the moment of his death, he did not understand what was going on. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine that he would die at the hands of a peak Exalt Realm cultivator. Blood mist rose. Kong Jian's Tao vanished and his soul perished. At this time, Monk CG had already turned around and was about to escape. In front of a peak Exalt Realm cultivator. Even with the protection of the Black Lotus, he was no match at all. However, how could Sumo let him go? Puff! Puff! With a flick of his wrist, Sumo's lotus vines instantly split into several. Like dragons, they directly entangled Monk CG. The lotus vines were top-grade, Lianbua. At this time, Monk CG was firmly bound. Sumo wanted him alive. At this time, the monks on the high platform also wanted to escape. Sumo smiled coldly. He did not move from his spot, but grabbed the void with one hand. Bang! Bang! None of the monks from Fudu Temple were spared. All of their heads were smashed and their souls perished. Those who aided the evildoers should all be killed. Fudu Temple destroyed all living beings. Killing them was a good deed. The woman's skeleton was still floating in the void. It was still emitting a faint red light. Bang! At this time, Wang Yu and Shun Ming suddenly separated. Both of their faces were deathly pale. Just now, if not for Sumo's help, they would definitely be seriously injured. Shun Ming looked at Sumo in a daze. Therefore, Sumo was currently in disguise. Shun Ming did not have ghost eyes, so he could not see through Sumo. Wang Yu glanced at Sumo and said lightly, "Next time, you can make a move earlier. If you were any slower, I'm afraid we sisters would have died." Hee hee. Sumo laughed. "Don't worry, miss you, sister." "He is?" Shun Ming asked. "He is the Demon King and also the Dark Supreme." Wang Yu said, "He is now called Sumo." "Oh." Shun Ming heard and could not help but smile. "Thank you, Demon King, for saving my life. It's my duty." "Miss Ming, you are welcome," Sumo said. Then, with a wave of his hand, the female skeleton was already in front of him. "You want this skeleton?" "Yes." Wang Yu nodded. "I heard that this skeleton can directly reach the peak of the Supremacy Realm. Therefore, we'll give it a try." "Good." Sumo smiled. "Then I will give this skeleton to you." With that, Sumo was about to give the skeleton to Wang Yu and Shun Ming. However, the white-haired old man suddenly appeared. "Wait." The white-haired old man suddenly stopped Sumo. "Oh." Sumo could not help but be stunned. "Demon King, you cannot give this skeleton to others. It is very important to you." The white-haired old man said. "Old man, why do you say so?" Sumo asked. "Also, I still do not know your background." At this time, Wang Yu also looked towards the old man, but her demonic eyes flashed. She was unable to see through the white-haired old man's background. Lotus Scholar? Wang Yu couldn't help but glance at Sumo. This was because Wang Yu could see through anyone below the Lotus Scholar level. "Haha, don't ask me who I am yet." The white-haired old man laughed. "Demon King, I will only say 3 words to you, and you will put away this skeleton." "Oh." Sumo was startled once more. "Old man, please speak." "Mubaimu," the white-haired old man said. "What?" Sumo's complexion suddenly changed, because this was a name that Wu had mentioned before. Unfortunately, Wu only remembered this name. She didn't know anything else. However, Mu Bai Mu was definitely related to Wu Er. Old man, please explain, Sumo said. Huh. The white-haired old man shook his head. You will have to find a rest yourself. This old man can only help you to this point. As he finished speaking, the white-haired old man's figure began to fade. Senior, Sumo hurriedly said. If fate wills it, we will meet again. The white-haired old man said, Demon King, the Four Void sect is the power of the Black Lotus. You can eliminate them along the way. Who? The white-haired old man completely vanished. Sumo was at a loss. And at this time, Wang Yu looked at Sumo. He couldn't help but arch an eyebrow. Demon King, that Buddha bone belongs to you. We don't want it. Eh? Sumo slowly came back to her senses. Just now, he had already said that he would give the bone away, but now he wanted to take it back. Thus, he didn't immediately act. The bone isn't important. Wang Yu saw through Sumo's hesitation. From what that old man said, this bone seems to be related to you. Today, if you don't act, we won't be able to keep our lives. This bone belongs to you. I just want to find my big brother, Wang Yu said faintly. Everything else isn't important. As long as I find my big brother, it doesn't matter what my cultivation realm is. I just want to find my big sister, Shen Ming added with a smile. Many thanks. Sumo cupped her fists towards Wang Yu and Shen Ming. Then, she put the bone into her universe bag. Then, she looked towards Monk Four Serenities. Where's the Four Void sect? Sumo asked coldly. Chapter 9, 39. Monk CG was bound by the lotus vines and couldn't break free. He was confused by the conversation between Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming. He didn't know who the people in front of him were, because he didn't know about the Demon King of the Three Realms. The Four Void sect was the #1 sect in the entire Sangharama realm, but that was only in the Sangharama realm. More importantly, Monk CG wasn't the absolute core of the Four Void sect. Originally, he was only ordered to retrieve the skeleton. As for helping Kong Jian to advance, it was just an excuse. If Sumo didn't kill Kong Jian, she would only be a white bone vessel when she returned to the Four Void sect. She would definitely die. Monk CG didn't expect that there would be a peak venerable on Sangharama planet. Where's the Four Void sect? Sumo's question stunned Monk CG. Why, you don't want to say? Sumo said indifferently. Huh? Monk CG came back to his senses. Sir, you're asking where the Four Void sect is. Do you want to kill your way into the sect? It's possible, Sumo said. Hee hee. Monk CG shook his head. Sir, it's true that you're a peak venerable. But this poor monk still advises you not to go. Because there are also peak venerables in the Four Void sect. If you fight a sect alone, it's like throwing an egg against a rock. Throwing an egg against a rock? Sumo couldn't help but smile. How many peak venerables are there in the Four Void sect? 2. Monk CG said. Moreover, there are 3 9th-stage venerables and several venerables. 2 peak venerables and 3 9th-stage venerables. Sumo nodded. If what you said is true, it's really powerful. Demon King, don't worry. This poor monk isn't lying. Monk CG looked at Sumo and said, Today, I've fallen into your hands, and I understand that there's no hope of escaping. As long as you keep this poor monk alive, I'll tell you everything I know. Hee hee. Sumo laughed. All right. As long as you behave yourself, I can spare your life. However, if you dare to lie, I will destroy your soul with a wave of my hand. I understand. For Desolations humbled himself again. Why did you use the Black Lotus technique just now? Sumo said. That's the Black Lotus barrier. CG said, so long as one is at the Exalt realm in the Four Sky sect, then they'll automatically be protected by it. The Black Lotus possesses miraculous power. Who blessed you? Sumo asked again. I don't know. Four Desolations said. In the Four Emptiness sect, only the 2 Exalts and the 3 Protectors know the origins of our Black Lotus. Sumo nodded. Why did you come to retrieve that skeleton? Whose corpse was that? Don't tell me you're really doing this for Kong Jian. The Demon King is wise. Monk Four Desolations said. That Kong Jian is an abandoned disciple of the Four Voids sect. However, his talent was not bad, so the sect secretly supported him later on. He's just a pawn of the sect. As for that skeleton, I don't know its exact origins. However, that skeleton is related to the two exalts. This time, we've brought 3 exalts, and we're determined to bring back the skeleton. However, I never expected. The skeleton is related to your 2 exalts. Sumo nodded, and his pupils constricted slightly at the same time. Just this alone was enough for him to make a trip to the Four Sky sect. After that, he tapped the center of Four Desolation's forehead with a single finger, and a drop of soul blood was directly extracted and placed in Sumo's palm. What did soul blood mean? All of them knew it very well. Monk Four Desolation laughed bitterly. He knew that if he wanted to live, then he had no choice but to fully rely on Sumo. His life was completely in Sumo's hands. Moreover, he would definitely perish once Sumo died. The Sangha realm has 18 planets. Which planet is the Four Sky sect on? Sumo said. The Four Sky sect is not on any planet. Monk Four Desolation shook his head. Oh, hee. Actually, Sumo had her doubts before, because Ji Guang's map mentioned that the Four Sky sect was the #1 sect in the Sangha realm, but it didn't mark the location of the Four Sky sect. The Sangha realm only has 18 planets. Because Planet Sangha is in the center, many people think that Planet Sangha is the most important planet in the Sangha realm. However, in reality, there is a dark star in the space-time corresponding to Planet Sangha. It's called Four Sky. Dark star. Sumo frowned. That's right. Monk Four Desolation said. What kind of star is that? Sumo said. A dark star is a type of star unique to the Glaze realm. Many cultivators call it a parasitic star, because all dark stars must have a star that covers them in the light. Only then can they be hidden in the dark. Monk Four Desolation said. A dark star needs the power of a star to nourish it. Oh, Sumo said. What if the Sangha realm is destroyed? If the Sangha realm is destroyed, then the Four Sky star will turn from dark to bright. Monk Four Desolation said. Then, after millions of years, a new dark star will appear. Do all the planets in the Glaze realm have a dark star? Sumo raised an eyebrow, because if that was really the case, it meant that the Glaze realm would be divided into 2 worlds, light and dark. No, Monk Four Desolation shook his head. The bright and dark stars are like human twins. They are relatively rare. At this point, he couldn't help but look at Wang Yu and Shen Ming, because just now, the combination of Wang Yu and Shen Ming was something he didn't expect. Shen Ming had been listening attentively, and his expression was as usual. When Wang Yu saw Monk Four Desolation looking at him, his eyes flashed, and his killing intent appeared. Monk Four Desolation hurriedly lowered his head. Just now, Wang Yu wasn't polite to Sumo. He understood that if the woman in red asked the Demon King to kill him, it would be a piece of cake. How do I get to the Four Sky sect? Sumo asked. Demon King, do you really want to go? Monk Four Desolation asked. Without a doubt, Sumo said. If this trip goes smoothly, I will return your freedom. Really? Monk Four Desolation asked. The Venerable of the 3 realms is never joking. Sumo said. Good. Thank you, Demon King. Monk Four Desolation nodded. Demon King, if you really want to go to the Four Sky sect, I can help you open the dark passage. Is the layout of the Four Sky star and the Sangha realm the same? Sumo asked. More or less the same. Monk Four Desolation said. Then where does Futu Temple lead to? Sumo said. Futu Temple leads to the Four Sky Temple. Monk Four Desolation said. Hee. When Sumo heard this, she nodded and smiled. Good. Then we will go straight to the Four Sky Temple. However, we can't go back like this. Oh, Monk Four Desolation was stunned. What does Demon King mean? When you came, there were 3 of you. Including Kong Jian, there are 4 of you. Sumo said, now there are still 4 of us. We can change our appearances. As she said this, Sumo waved her hand. The lotus vines on Monk Four Desolation disappeared. As for Sumo, she formed a seal with her hands. The light in her hands fell on Wang Yu and Shun Ming. In an instant, they turned into Monk Four Eyes and Monk Four Tong. Sumo became Monk Kong Jian. At the same time, a set of white bones appeared in her hands. However, it wasn't a real white bone. It could be passed off as the real thing. Monk Four Desolation was extremely shocked, because he couldn't see any flaws in the three people or the white bones. "Don't worry," Sumo said, "unless they have ghost eyes or a lotus warrior. Even a peak venerable will not be able to see through my spells. How could the Windwheel's secret technique be ordinary?" Chapter 940. Sikong Sect, the #1 sect in Sangarama Temple. In fact, in most cases, it was only passed down by word of mouth among some Sangarama cultivators. The Sikong sect was a mysterious existence to the relatively low-level cultivators of Sangarama world. The Sikong sect was a parasitic existence. Only reincarnation-level cultivators would know about this phenomenon. If their level was not high enough, they could not understand the structure of this parasitic world. The space where the Sikong star was located was completely different from Sangarama planet. However, it existed because of Sangarama planet. From the perspective of Haoyu, it could be said that the Sikong star was in the shadow world of Sangarama planet. On Sangarama planet, Monk CG looked at Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shun Ming's transformation and was full of praise. The Demon King's secret technique is extremely mysterious. Monk CG's words were mostly sincere. He was at the third stage of the Venerable Realm and was definitely a powerful cultivator. However, it was the first time he had seen a secret technique like Sumo's that could change the appearance of others and make it so that high-level cultivators could not see through it. "Demon King, your technique is really good." Shenming also smiled and said, "If there is a chance, can you teach me?" "Sure," Sumo said. "Insignificant skill," Wang Yu said lightly. In her eyes, Xiao Luo was not as good as AMU. What's more, this Windwell's secret technique was really ineffective against her. When the ghost eye was opened, Shun Ming was still Shin Ming, and Sumo was still Sumo. Hee. Sumo smiled faintly and did not care. "However, you must be careful not to speak when you see others. If you really want to speak, don't use your own voice. Just now, you have all heard the voice of Si Tong and Four Eyes. It should not be a problem to imitate it." "Ba, I understand." Shenming put his hands together and pretended to be serious. At that moment, it was exactly the same as Si Tong. "How is it?" Shenming laughed. "That's right," Sumo said. "You can pass off the fake as the real one. Is it interesting to flatter each other like this?" Wang Yu rolled his eyes at Sumo and Shunming. "If you're not going to Sikong Temple, I'm leaving. If you're going, can you stop dawdling?" Shenming stuck out his tongue. She feared and loved Wang Yu at the same time, because back then, the tears of the river of forgetfulness, Wang Yu's personality was not gentle. Back in the magical fantasy mansion, Wang Yu's words were absolute. She didn't dare to disobey Wang Yu. So, she immediately shut up. "All right, let's go." Sumo smiled, then said to Four Desolations, "Four Desolations, open the passage. When we arrive at the Four Emptiness Temple, we'll pretend that we've completed our mission and return. As for the other matters, you can act according to the circumstances." "And I want to know, what does your High Lord want to do with this skeleton, and whose skeleton is it?" At this moment, Sumo had already transformed into an ancient wooden tray. He was like Kong Jian, holding the ancient wooden tray, on which was a fake skeleton. However, the skeleton was not completely fake because it was transformed from Sumo's own skeleton puppet. "As you command." Monk Four Desolations bowed at Sumo. Now, he had no other choice. The soul blood was in Sumo's hands, and he could only help Sumo with all his strength to have a chance of survival. Looking again, Monk Four Desolations started to form a seal with both hands. Instantly, a secret door appeared in the void. It was exactly the same as the formation that appeared when Monk Four Desolations came. Inside the black hole, a dim light was faintly discernible. Monk Four Desolations was in front, Sumo was at the back, then Shun Ming, and finally Wang Yu was at the back. In the space-time tunnel, length was not important. Even Sumo didn't have a clear concept of time in the space-time formation. He only felt that after less than 10 minutes, their eyes lit up slightly. Moonlight? That was Sumo's first reaction. Oh, what a big moon. Shenming tried to keep his voice as low as possible. At this time, they had already stepped out of the space-time formation. In the void, there was a supermoon. Moreover, it was blue, emitting a very mesmerizing blue light. It hung in the void, making everything look like a dream. It was a beautiful scene. On a mountain not far away, there was a group of very old temple buildings. That blue moon is actually planet Sangharama. Monk 4 Desolation said. However, if you look for planet Sangharama on planet 4 Void, you will never find it. It can be seen as an illusion. At the same time, it is the only visible star on planet 4 Void. Almost all of the spiritual energy on planet 4 Void comes from planet Sangharama. Oh, Sumo couldn't help but frown. But the spiritual energy on planet 4 Void is much denser than on planet Sangharama. Hee. Of course. Monk 4 Desolations laughed. Because 3/4 of the spiritual energy on planet Sangharama is supplied to planet 4 Void. This is the relationship between the bright and dark stars of Lazuli world. Sumo and the others listened and nodded. That temple in front is the 4 Void sect, right? Sumo asked. That's right. 300 miles ahead is the 4 Void Mountains 4 Void Temple. Monk 4 Desolation said, usually, the 4 Void sect doesn't care much about anything on planet Sangharama. On the 18 planets of planet Sangharama, there are existences like Fudu Temple. On the surface, they are independent sects, but behind them is the 4 Void sect. There don't seem to be many disciples in the 4 Void sect. Sumo squinted at the distant ancient temple. He spread out his divine sense and sensed that there weren't many disciples in the temple. 3,000 Buddhas, 1 venerable per 100. Monk 4 Desolations laughed. What do you mean? Sumo said. The entire 4 Void sect actually has no more than 3,000 disciples. These disciples are all direct disciples of the 4 Void sect. Their cultivation is profound and their potential is huge. And for every 100 people, there will be 1 venerable. Monk 4 Desolations explained. 1 venerable per 100? Sumo couldn't help but frown. Such a rate of venerable attainment was unheard of, because there weren't many cultivators who could become venerables from the rebirth realm. But now, there are a total of 12 venerables in that ancient temple, but there are 3,372 other disciples. At this moment, Wang Yu, who was behind them, said plainly. When he said this, Sumo was still fine, because she knew how powerful Wang Yu's ghost eye was. Monk 4 Desolations, on the other hand, was shocked, because there was a peak venerable level formation on the 4 Void Mountain. Even Sumo might not be able to investigate everything so clearly. 3,000 Buddhas, 1 venerable per 100 is just a saying. Among them, the 4 Void Temple is exaggerating. Miss, you don't have to be so calculative. Monk 4 Desolations explained with a smile. Now, there are still a few venerables wandering outside. Now, excluding me, there are still Sitong and Simu. The 4 Void sect should have a total of 15 venerable level cultivators. Since that's the case, it's extraordinary. Sumo thought for a while and said, I'm afraid it's because of the Black Lotus quickly becoming a venerable. Otherwise, it's impossible to have such a ratio. Demon King is wise. Monk 4 Desolations let out a long sigh. That's right. Actually, in the cave abode at the back of the 4 Void Mountain, there has always been a Black Lotus. In the 4 Void Temple, cultivators above the 7th level of Rebirth Realm can go there regularly. With the help of the Black Lotus, our cultivation speed will increase by leaps and bounds. Unfortunately, this will make your foundations unstable. It's like pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Sumo frowned and said, You will only become tools and puppets. In the end, you will be exhausted and it will be hard for you to attain Tao. Hee. Monk 4 Desolations looked at the 4 Void Temple from afar and laughed helplessly, but did not say anything. Chapter 941. Perhaps everyone would want to own a puppet. This was because controlling a puppet might give one a sense of pleasure. At the same time, everyone might be a puppet. It was just that at different levels, the corresponding masters were different. Humans were constantly being restrained. Sumo was right when she said that CG was Black Lotus's puppet. However, wasn't CG Sumo's puppet now? To CG, he was still a puppet, just that his master had changed. Therefore, CG could only smile helplessly. He was never free. CG, don't worry. Sumo saw through CG's thoughts and could not help but smile. I will do my best to protect you. After this is done, I will definitely return your soul blood and set you free. Thank you again, Demon King, CG said. Regardless of the final outcome, Sumo's words made CG feel slightly at ease. We are about to enter 4 Emptiness Temple. CG continued. Demon King, ladies, please be careful. To us, the current 4 Emptiness Temple is a dangerous place. I will try my best to make everything look natural and normal. Sitong and Simu were originally my people, but the 2 supremacies might want to ask Kong Jian. I will act according to the circumstances, Sumo said. CG nodded. Then he straightened his body slightly, and his entire temperament changed slightly. After all, Sitong and Simu were his juniors, and Kong Jian was not a supremacy. Therefore, he had to display the imposing manner of a leader. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shunming naturally knew how to cooperate, and each played their respective roles well. Whoosh! A cloud appeared under CG's feet, and the 4 of them headed straight for the mountain gate of 4 Emptiness Temple. The distance of 300 miles was covered in an instant. At this moment, 4 young monks stood outside the mountain gate of 4 Emptiness Temple. 4 of them were in the first stage of rebirth. They looked to be in their 20s, but Sumo and the rest knew that these young monks had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. The 4 young monks were the gatekeepers of 4 Emptiness Temple. Greetings, Uncle Masters. When the 4 young monks saw CG and the rest, their expressions did not change much. After all, there were quite a number of monks going in and out of the monastery on a daily basis. When they saw Kong Jian, they felt somewhat unfamiliar. However, they didn't have a right to interrogate the person CG brought back. In fact, Kong Jian had also cultivated in the 4 Emptiness Temple, but they had not interacted with each other. Umeba, 4 Solitude nodded lightly and didn't say anything else. Then, he led Sumo and the others through the mountain gate. They did not arouse any suspicion. After passing through the mountain gate, they soon arrived at the temple of 4 Emptiness. The 4 Emptiness Temple looked ancient and mysterious. The grayish-white walls were about 70 to 80 feet high. That was not something that ordinary temples could compare to. The runes on the courtyard walls were faintly discernible, emitting a faint radiance. 2 gray doors with black knockers were also covered with runes. It was a restriction at the peak of the Venerable Realm. Actually, the area within a radius of several dozen miles was the territory of the Temple of 4 Emptiness. The entire temple was like a Buddhist country bestowed by the heavens. Creak, just as CG and the others were about to reach the entrance of the temple, the 2 doors slowly opened. 3 monks walked out from within the formation. Just like Monk CG, they were middle-aged and wore black monk robes. The leader was a stage 4 Venerable. The 2 monks behind him were stage 1 Venerable. Amiba, the leader of the 3 monks, put his palms together and smiled. Congratulations, junior brothers. You've completed your mission and successfully brought back the Buddha's bones. Senior brother, Ming. Monk CG smiled too. With the protection of the Honorable Lord, we didn't let you down. Moreover, I brought back junior brother Kong Jian, so I can ask the Honorable Lord to help him change his bones. Ming and CG looked at each other and knew what was going on. Kong Jian was at most a vessel for the bones. Once Kong Jian returned to the 4 Emptiness sect, he would definitely die. Excellent. Excellent. Monk Ming smiled at Kong Jian and said, Junior brother Kong Jian, it's been hundreds of thousands of years since we last met. I didn't expect you to really return to the sect, and you've even improved. You're really faded with Buddha? Thank you, senior brother Ming. Sumo, who was disguised as Kong Jian, put her palms together and bowed at Ming. At the same time, she nodded at the other two monks. Ming and Kong Jian had met in the Four Emptiness Temple before. However, they did not interact much. Kong Jian was finally released from his sect, and he was actually an unranked disciple. Ming was currently a stage 4 venerable. If they did not meet here today, he probably would not even remember Kong Jian. At this moment, Sumo, who was disguised as Kong Jian, had a calm and slightly indifferent expression. It was indeed very suitable for the current situation. Kong Jian was about to reach the heavens in a single step, so there was naturally no need for him to be too humble. Monk Ming sneered in his heart. CG did not want to waste any more time here. He was also afraid of giving himself away, so he asked directly, Senior brother Ming, are the two honorable lords in the Zen cave? We're going to report. The two honorable lords are in the Zen cave. I'm here to pick you up. Ming smiled and said, Come, let's go together. Thank you, senior brother Ming. CG said. Thus, the 7 of them went to the Zen cave together. There were many buildings in the Four Emptiness Temple. The Honorable Lord's Zen cave was at the back of the mountain of the Four Emptiness Temple. If there was no urgent matter in the sect, they would not use their Dharma skills. Therefore, the 7 of them walked. Ming led the way, while CG and the others followed. Sumo secretly observed the entire Four Emptiness Temple. This place was really a treasured place. There were many Buddhist temples and ancient pagodas. However, she rarely saw monks along the way. The huge Four Emptiness Temple was actually quiet. However, Buddhist light could be seen everywhere in the temple. On the surface, this was definitely a peaceful place for Buddhism. However, Sumo kept feeling that there was an ominous aura in the temple. That feeling was actually very faint, even faintly discernible. Sumo even thought that it might have been an illusion. It was a rather strange feeling. After the light, there was darkness. At this moment, Wang Yu was slightly frowning. That was because she could see things that Sumo could not. Inside the Four Emptiness Temple, there was dense Buddhist qi, and it looked auspicious. However, in Wang Yu's eyes, it was completely different. What she saw was actually more black mist. That mist was definitely not Buddhist light. Instead, it was somewhat sinister. And in the void of the Four Emptiness Mountain, there was actually an incomparably huge black lotus. That black lotus had straight roots, and its petals were incomparably huge. It was like a rootless giant tree floating in the void. The entire Four Emptiness Mountain was under its shroud. A sect under the Black Lotus? Wang Yu's family's inheritance could be said to be extensive and profound. However, when she saw this scene, she could not help but be greatly shocked. That was because this Four Emptiness Temple clearly existed in 2 worlds. Everything about it was actually under the control of the Black Lotus. At this moment, Sumo looked at Wang Yu. Wang Yu raised his eyebrows in response. That meaning was very obvious. This was a place of trouble, and it was not ordinary. Sumo's heart could not help but sink slightly. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.